Constitution, there were two big issues that were very contentious. If you go back, and it's fascinating reading, by the way, I recommend this. James Madison's journals are online all over the place. You can read them easily. Madison kept the notes of the Constitutional Convention, and every day he kept, you know, he literally wrote down everything everybody said. And there were a lot of debates about a lot of things, but the two biggest debates had to do with either A, slavery, which is not what I'm talking about here, or B, whether we should have a standing army during times of peace. This was a BFD. And most of the members of the Constitutional Convention, because they had seen standing armies during times of peace, when they're, you know, they're sitting in country, they got nothing to do, they're twiddling their thumbs, they rise up and they overthrow the government, right? They've seen military coups. Europe was filled with, you know, the history of Europe is the history of military coups. So how do we prevent this was the big question. And they came up with two strategies. One was that there would be no standing army during time of peace, so the president could basically cut it down to virtually nothing, which, by the way, is what Thomas Jefferson did. When he became president in 1801, there were over 300,000 men in the Army, over 360,000 men in the U.S. Army, left over from the Revolutionary War. By the time he left office in 1809, he had that down to 6,000 men in the Army, which turned out to be a problem because in the War of 1812, we didn't have enough of an army to stop the Canadians and the British from invading and making it all the way down to Washington, D.C. and burning the White House. Remember Dolly Madison rescuing the portrait of George Washington? So that was the end of the conversation about the need to end a standing army. But back when the Constitution was written, it was a hot topic. And so they came up with a couple of strategies. One was the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was this idea that every state will have a militia. The federal government will officially authorize states to arm their militias. And each state's militia, you know, we call them the National Guard today, each state's militia could be called out in the event that the nation was invaded. This is the way Switzerland, you know, kind of ran their military thing for centuries. It wasn't a novel idea. Countries had been doing this to avoid this very problem of military coups. And to really make it emphatic that they meant business beyond the Second Amendment, they actually wrote into Article 1, Section 8, that the Army of the United States shall not, well, here's the power. This is the actual quote. Congress shall have the power to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a term longer than 2 years. In other words, you can have an army, but every 2 years you have to ask yourself, do we want to continue to have an army? Now, as I said, this has not been a debate since 1812. But it was huge at the founding of the Republic. And therefore, in the Constitution, it says, if you guys don't pass this legislation, the Army ceases to exist, or at least it ceases to be funded. And, you know, within probably a year or so, nobody getting a paycheck, you're not going to have a whole lot of people still hanging around. Not to mention the fact that you can't buy gas for vehicles and you can't buy food for the PX and, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why they call the NDAA must-pass legislation. So what does this have to do with Trump? Well, when Trump came into office, being a mobster, being a professional criminal, a professional lifelong criminal, who has been one step ahead of the law his entire life, he believed that the best and most effective way to corrupt our federal government and get away with the crimes that he was intending to commit. He wanted to make a whole pile of money off the presidency. And he did commit a lot of crimes. I mean, you know, the Hatch Act violations, using the White House as a prop for campaign videos, selling products from the White House. I mean, it was a parade of horribles. And that's just among the smallest, right? He figured the way to protect himself from being prosecuted for being a criminal in the White House was to corrupt the Department of Justice. And so he hired Bill Barr. Bill Barr was the guy who helped cover up Iran-Contra for George Herbert Walker Bush and Ronald Reagan. He was George H.W. Bush's attorney general back in 1992 when they pardoned Caspar Weinberger and 4 other people and ended the investigation into Iran-Contra. Lawrence Walsh, the special prosecutor, front page of the New York Times, Christmas Eve, 1992. You know, this is a cover-up. It's a massive cover-up that this crime that Ronald Reagan committed in order to win the 1980 election. You know, cutting a deal with the Iranians to hold the hostages and then selling them weapons as a thank you. So Trump thought Bill Barr was going to protect him, right? We'll take this corrupt guy and put him in charge of the Department of Justice. We'll get another corrupt guy, Chris Wray, or at least a toady, a guy who will go along with what I want. We'll put him in charge of the FBI. And it did. It worked. The FBI and the Department of Justice did not investigate Trump during the 4 years he was president, even though he kept committing crimes. And for 2 full years after he left office, they didn't investigate him because of all the dead enders left over, and Chris Wray is still running the FBI. But now Trump knows that that wasn't enough. He still lost the 2020 election and had to leave office. So he's asking himself, what do I do this time in order to make sure? Well, it turns out that the one thing that stopped Trump on January 6th from declaring a national state of emergency, he actually had an executive order doing this, ordering the military to seize voting machines. And the one thing that stopped him was General Mark Milley, was the military, the Pentagon. The Pentagon said, we will not go along with this. You can call up the military and tell us to go get these voting machines, but it's a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, and we are not going to do it. So Trump has pretty much said out loud, I mean, just 6 months ago, he called again for firing Mark Milley. He has pretty much said out loud that if he becomes president, the first thing he's going to do is he's going to fire all the heads of the military. He'll fire the head of the Marine Corps, he'll fire the head of the Army, he'll fire the head of the Navy, he'll fire the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all of them, and replace them all with sycophants, with toadies, with Steve Bannon and Kash Patel type people. And I think that, you know, he'll do it. I really do. And I don't think that this is something unique to Trump. I think that any of these MAGA Republicans would probably do the same thing because they're all committed to ending democracy in America and replacing it with strongman fascism. So what do? Well, number one, Congress needs to strengthen the Posse Comitatus Act. Number two, it needs to deal with the emergency powers of the president. Number three, one of the ways that Trump so badly corrupted things, and he did this with his Secretary of Defense, and he did this, you know, Chris, what was Chris's last name? Chris Miller and his assistant, Kash Patel. He did this with, you know, a whole bunch of figures was to make them acting, right? Alexander Hamilton pointed out in Federalist something or other, I forget the number, that the whole point of Senate confirmation was to keep out people of low character, basically, to prevent a president from putting lousy people into office. He says it would, Senate confirmation provides, quote, this is Federalist 76, an excellent check upon the spirit of favoritism in the president and would tend greatly to prevent the appointment of unfit characters. So the Senate needs to change the 1998 Vacancies Act to say that you can no longer do acting people in cabinet positions and Senate confirmation. You've got to have Senate confirmation. These things would Trump-proof the government. And frankly, I realize the Republicans control the House of Representatives, but there have to be at least 5 or 6 Republicans, or 7 or 8 or 9 Republicans in the House of Representatives who would go along with the Democrats on these things. These, I mean, we got to pull this fascist MAGA weed out. And, but in the meantime, we've got to harden our country's defense against it. What say you? In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts.
There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Pat Mitchell. It's titled Becoming a Dangerous Woman, Embracing Risk to Change the World. This is from the preface titled The Most Dangerous Woman in the Room. Yes, I'll be there. Eve Ensler was calling with an invitation to what she described as the meeting of movements, planned for the first week of January 2017. In the wake of a polarizing presidential election in the United States, Eve had decided it was time for activists to come together to shape strategies that would unify and leverage the collective power of a wide range of social justice organizations. Who else is coming, I asked. I'm not releasing the invitation list, Eve replied, but you'll want to be in the room. Indeed, I did want to be in that room, knowing from past experiences that any meeting or event that Eve organized would be meaningful. So I showed up, as the invitation indicated, at a nondescript building in Stone Ridge, New York, and surrendered my cell phone to the smiling young volunteers at the front door. Best to have all communication devices outside the room, was the explanation, which of course heightened my anticipation about what would transpire within the room. I entered a large room and saw Eve standing at the front with folding chairs in a circle. Mingling about the room were some familiar faces, the meeting's other conveners, Kimberly Crenshaw of the African American Policy Forum, Naomi Klein, award-winning author and activist, independent media entrepreneur and journalist Laura Flanders, and Jane Fonda, actor and activist. We were asked to find our seats, and Eve began. "We are living in dangerous times," was her opening line, and such times call for new levels of activism from all the communities represented in this room. Let's begin by identifying who's in the room. One by one, the introductions began. I'm one of the founders of the Women's March. I'm the executive director of 350.org. I run Project South. With each introduction, the level of leadership and activists' credentials became more impressive and, for me, more intimidating. My anxiety building. How was I going to identify myself? I have no title and was no longer running an organization, having left my CEO position at the Paley Center for Media the previous spring. I could say that I was the CEO of Pat Mitchell Media with its grand total of 2 employees, including myself, but that felt wholly inadequate to explain why I belonged in that room. I mentally rehearsed some other options. I could say I was a lifetime advocate for women, true enough if a little vague. I could list some of my previous titles, but why make a point of being the former anything? I was struggling to come up with how to identify myself in the present, an identity that would hopefully give some indication of why Eve had included me in this circle of activists and leaders. Finally, it was my turn. Before I knew it, I heard myself saying, "I'm Pat Mitchell, and I'm a dangerous woman." I'm not sure exactly what prompted this personal declaration of dangerousness, but I could tell from the looks of surprise that I needed to add a bit more context. At this time in my life, about to turn 75, I continued, I have nothing left to prove, less to lose, and I'm ready to take more risks and to be less politic and polite. As Eve said, these are dangerous times, and dangerous times call for dangerous women. That got a big sisterly yes from Eve and others in the circle, including Jane Fonda, who was sitting across from me, and stood up declaring, "Well, I'm older than my friend Pat, so that makes me even more dangerous." Laughter erupted, of course, and I could sense that others were contemplating exactly what becoming more dangerous to meet the challenges of dangerous times would mean for each of us and for the work we had convened to consider. Certainly, Jane Fonda's life of activism is a textbook case for being bold and brave. During our many years of friendship, I've witnessed her willingness to take risks for a good cause, to speak out and show up, even when it meant personal peril or sacrifice. At 81, she is still on the front lines, campaigning for domestic and restaurant workers' rights, standing with the American Indian communities, protesting natural resource exploitation at Standing Rock, and busier as an actor than ever. In her book, Prime Time, Jane advanced the idea that older women have the potential to become the most powerful population on the planet. She's a great example of how we embrace that potential at every age. My personal potential for becoming dangerous is perhaps more directly linked to my friendship with Eve Ensler. From our first conversation in war-torn Sarajevo in 1998, I've been deeply inspired by her courage and her commitment to do whatever is necessary to end violence against women everywhere. Taking risks comes easier to Eve than to many. Writing and performing the vagina monologues, making it the centerpiece of a global movement, V-Day, to end gender-based violence, is a transformative approach to activism that I feel privileged to have experienced. Yes, I was an activist and woman's advocate before I met Eve, but through my relationship with her and as a board member of the V-Day movement, I've met activists facing dangers every day to create change in some of the most difficult places on earth to be a woman. But until that day, I had not felt dangerous myself. Declaring myself a dangerous woman still feels a bit, well, dangerous. And I readily admit to some second thoughts about declaring it even more widely and boldly as the title of this book. But every day since that convening, I'm discovering more about what being dangerous means in my life and why I believe that it's time for us, women and the men who stand with us, at whatever age or place in life's journey, to embrace risks.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Thursday. Is the earth close to the great dying? Is Donald Trump close to being indicted? By the way, just a kind of indictment to watch. Two of his lawyers, Todd Blanche and John Lauro, just finished their meeting with the Justice Department with Special Counsel Jack Smith's team. They're not talking to the press, but two sources with direct knowledge of the meeting told NBC News that federal prosecutors told these two lawyers of Trump's that he is going to be indicted. So, whether that's going to happen today, tomorrow, next week, we don't know. But I will keep you up to date. And like I said, we're monitoring this. We've got television monitors in the studio. We check the news, regularly. We're all keeping track of this. So should anything happen, you'll hear it first here if you keep listening. So a lot going on. So anyhow, as the earth close to the great dynamic, Republicans are taking money from the fossil fuel industry and inserting provisions in must-pass legislation to help the oil and gas industry. I want to get into both those in this first hour. And also, is Mitt Romney the last decent man who's a Republican? This is an interesting question. In the second hour of our program, Phil Ittner is going to drop by live from Ukraine, our friend who's the war correspondent who's now posted in Ukraine. Also, more lies and fraud from the Supreme Court. This is really getting stinky, this Creative 303 case. And Greg Gutfeld has disgusted Fox staff who are saying at any other place of business his career would be over. What's going on at Fox? In the third hour of our program, is Gen Z about to take the electoral baton for 2024? And what does that mean? Do Democrats have a plan for retaking the South? And in Florida, doctors can now refuse to provide services to gay people. We'll talk about that in the third hour of the program. So an awful lot going on today. My op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com, and I also posted it over on Daily Kos, is titled, Is Earth Close to the Great Dying? Two pieces of this. If you remember the disaster movie The Day After Tomorrow? It came out in 2004, where suddenly New York City is frozen and covered with 30 feet of snow. That movie took a scenario that could happen if the Great Conveyor Belt Current, this current, the AMOC it's called, this current that brings heat from the South Pacific, south around the southern tip of Africa, and then up the east coast of South and Central and North America. We call it the Gulf Stream.
and then out into the Atlantic, where it dumps that heat in the middle of the North Atlantic and keeps Europe, which has, London is at the same latitude as Calgary, right? But it keeps Europe temperate and allows for, food to be grown to feed the 740 million Europeans. If that current shuts down, and it has been weakening, if that current shuts down, then Europe could be thrown into famine. Now, it wouldn't be as quickly as it happened in the movie. It would take probably years, maybe decades, but it would be, probably the largest human migration in history that would be the result of this, or mass die-off. I don't know, one or the other. And now Nature Communications last week just published an article titled "Warning of a Forthcoming Collapse of the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation," the AMOC. In other words, the Great Conveyor Belt, the Gulf Stream. And they're saying that, the IPCC said that this could happen in the 22nd century. In other words, 70, 80 years from now. They're arguing or building a case, a scientific case, that it could happen as quickly as 2025, 2 years from now. Now, the other problem that brings is that was published by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, titled "Evidence for Massive Methane Hydrate Destabilization During the Penultimate Interglacial Warming." And what they're looking at is that during this period of time, about 126,000 years ago, there was this sudden burst of methane in the atmosphere that was followed by a sudden burst of global warming that was, disruptive to life on the planet, and changed sea levels, quite significantly. This appears to be the result of the methane that is frozen in our oceans, bubbling, warming up and turning back, from a solid back to a gas and floating up into the atmosphere. And, methane is 80 times more effective than, or 70 some odd times more effective than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. Now, that process is referred to as the clathrate gun, or the clathrate gun hypothesis, which is that, and in fact, Joe Biden is speaking right now at the White House saying we can no longer deny the impact of climate change. I mean, this is like, today is the perfect storm. 140 million Americans are under heat warning today. The clathrate gun hypothesis is that when the oceans warm to a certain threshold, these frozen sediments, or these frozen, it's kind of like snow cone slurry, these frozen, and it's 1.4 trillion tons of methane, that these frozen slurries, bubble up to the surface. They melt and go up to the surface and jack global warming. It happened in a small way 125,000 years ago. Nobody's sure what provoked it. It might have been some kind of volcanic activity someplace, motion in the continents, who knows. But 250 million years ago, we know that, or we're pretty certain that this is what caused the largest extinction in the history of Earth. It's called the Great Dying, or the Permian mass extinction. And 70% of all life on land and 90% of all life in the oceans died during that period of time. And that was caused by these methane crystals warming up. So now in this article that was published in the in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, they just come right out and say that if the warming that is happening right now in the oceans causes the AMOC, the Great Conveyor Belt, to shut down, the shutting down of that Great Conveyor Belt speeds up the probability of the clathrate gun hypothesis. In fact, this is literally from their study. They say, quote, "The key findings of our study add to a growing body of observational findings strongly supporting the clathrate gun hypothesis. Importantly," now keep in mind, everybody thought that it would take 6 or 7 degrees Celsius of warming to trigger the clathrate gun. They go on to say, "Importantly, the interval we have studied is marked by a mean climate state comparable to future projections of transient global climate warming of 1.3 to 3 degrees Celsius." Well, we hit 1.3 degrees this year. July 4th was the hottest day in the history of the human race.
And, when the last time that CO2 levels were what they are right now, we're at 422 parts per million right now of CO2. The last time they were at that level, there were trees growing in Antarctica. So we're not at a destination right now. We are on a journey. We are on a path. And it's a path that's it's not to a good place. Meanwhile, in the midst of all this, the Republicans who take money from the fossil fuel industry, who basically to a man and woman are bought and owned by the fossil fuel billionaires here in the United States, Republicans are trying to kneecap efforts by the Biden administration to do anything about this. They have put over a dozen anti-climate change amendments into these must-pass pieces of legislation, the annual budget, the military budget, the Department of Energy budget. There's a bunch of these budgets that are passing through Congress right now, and they originate in the House of Representatives. The ones in the House Appropriations Committee, that committee is chaired by Texas Republican Representative Kay Granger, who has taken nearly $1.2 million from the oil and gas sector in her career. On her website, she brags that she has fought to prevent spending to combat climate change. A line in her bill would bar the Biden administration from spending any money on, quote, climate change fisheries research. This comes after tens of thousands of dead fish just washed ashore in Texas because the temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico are so high. The science funding bill also zeroes out funding for the U.S. Global Change Research Program at the National Science Foundation. It also defunds a separate Biden order to enhance the federal government's forest stewardship and promote, quote, climate-smart stewardship of mature and old-growth forests. The bill authorizing funding for the Department of the Interior, which oversees public lands, says, and I quote, none of the funds made available by this act may be used to consider or incorporate the social cost of carbon. It also permanently restricts $1.3 billion in grant funding under the Clean Air Act to mitigate the effects of air pollution. This at a time when a quarter of all Americans are living in an area where air pollution is dangerous. It also includes provisions requiring the Secretary of Interior to conduct quarterly onshore oil and gas lease sales, as well as restart fossil fuel lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico. It bars the government from issuing leases for offshore wind development in Florida. This legislation has been spearheaded by Mike Simpson, a Republican from Idaho, who received nearly $900,000 in campaign contributions from electric utilities and $440,000 from oil and gas industry donors. It's amazing how little money it costs to buy a member of Congress. These industries are making billions in profits. Then there's the bill funding the Department of State and Foreign Aid. That legislation would bar funding for the Green Climate Fund, which received $1 billion from the Biden administration in April. It also prohibits the federal government from financing the Clean Technology Fund, which helps us transition away from fossil fuels. The House bill funding the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, wants to bar that agency's proposed climate disclosure rules. That committee is headed by Steve Womack, Republican from Arkansas, who got more than $175,000 from the oil and gas industry. And finally, the bill funding the Department of Labor will ban OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, from investigating deaths at farms related to extreme heat. This is what the Republicans are doing in the face of a worldwide global warming crisis, a climate emergency. They're doing everything they can to prevent our government from stopping the subsidies and the ongoing funding of fossil fuels and to prevent our government from going green, essentially, or even looking at the science. This is criminal malfeasance, at least morally criminal. And you can track it all back to the Supreme Court having legalized the bribery of politicians by the oil and gas industry.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Not to mention 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court banning the Biden administration from calling CO2 a pollutant, taking it away from the EPA.
And welcome back. Let's pick up some of your calls here. Lauren in Seattle. Hey, Lauren, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thank you for your show. I wanted to mention another movie that I would love you to see, and it's called Sound of Freedom. It's just as important as Oppenheimer and Barbie. It's a true story of a Homeland Security agent who is following pedophiles in the United States.
It is also massive right-wing propaganda and implies that the Democrats are part of this. And no, Lauren, I'm sorry. That film, it might have started out with the best of intentions, and I'm sure that there's no doubt that there are bad people in this country, but that is being promoted on all the right-wing sites right now because of its QAnon connections and the QAnon connections of the people who produced it. So, respectfully, no, thank you. Sean in Stamford, Connecticut. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how's it going?
Good. What's up?
Okay, well, to talk with some people I know and about working to climate change, and I have a prediction I would like your thoughts on, and that is that places like Phoenix, South Florida, and other places in the South, even Salt Lake City, will see a mass migration out of those areas within the next 10 years or so.
I think you're right. I mean, it's just, a month-long over 100-degree weather is just, well, on the other hand, that's not abnormal for some parts of the South. That's not abnormal for Las Vegas, for example, and a lot of people live in Vegas.
Well, I know. Now, a friend of mine who just left Tampa, she lived in Sun City. Now she lives in Georgia. And she was telling that she was checking in on her area, and it was 110 degrees air temperature in Sun City, while the water temperature in the Gulf was 97 degrees.
Right. And
now they're saying it was 101 degrees in the Atlantic.
Off the coast of Miami yesterday, yeah.
Right.
Which is the temperature that Jacuzzi recommends for hot tubs.
Right. I mean, you can't leave where it's like you can't go in the ocean because it's too warm, because you're not going to cool off, and also you have all the red tide going on the coast because of all the agriculture.
Right, and it's killing the coral and it's killing the fish. I mean, there was this massive fish die-off just last week in Texas, from the Gulf, and then a huge one in Australia also recently.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're watching as the oceans are dying. We are killing them. The oceans absorb 90% of the heat, of the CO2, of the carbon that we're producing, and they're absorbing most of the heat as well. And actually, it may not be 90% of the CO2. They're absorbing 90% of the heat that's being trapped by the sun.
Right, and water holds heat longer than land does.
That's
so
right.
when you have like you said, that's why the oceans are getting so warm all of a sudden.
Right. And that gets amplified by the La Nina El Nino oscillation, where during La Nina, basically, heat is being pushed down into the ocean, and during El Nino, basically, heat is coming up out of the ocean into the atmosphere, and that's what's driving this wild summer right now. In some part is the El Nino, but it's also the global warming. So, anyhow, Sean, thanks a lot for the call. I got to run. It's 22 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Stay tuned. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So when was the last time you heard some Republican ranting about how, like Ron DeSantis, Florida's where woke goes to die, and we're declaring war on woke, and all that kind of. Republicans have been using dog whistles for most of my lifetime to shout out to their generally white racist base against various minority groups. Richard Nixon was, we're law and order, and as John Ehrlichman pointed out, his whole war on drugs was basically a war on black people and hippies. George Herbert Walker Bush had Willie Horton. George W. Bush had the Muslims. Donald Trump, it's the Mexican rapists. It just never ends. Woke is just the latest dog whistle they've got. So the next time somebody uses that phrase, just, ask them, what are you talking about here? Are you just trying to tell me that you're a bigot? I mean, what are you really saying? There's a whole rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. "24 minutes past the hour. Is Mitt Romney the last decent Republican? Well, maybe. I mean, Mitt Romney takes an enormous amount of money from the gas and oil industry. But Donald Trump just went on a rant about Mitt Romney. And this is interesting. I mean, keep an eye on this because the cracks are starting to show in the GOP. And I think that's kind of the story behind the story here. A couple of days ago, Mitt Romney, Monday, Mitt Romney wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal. And in that op-ed, he talked about the importance of the Republican Party not nominating Donald Trump because Donald Trump is a loser. Now, he didn't, say we shouldn't nominate him because he's a fascist or because he's a psychopath or because he's a narcissist. He said we shouldn't nominate him because he's a loser. But, anyhow. He says the way to do this, he says, if the field narrows to a two-person race before Trump has the nomination sewn up, then this is a possibility that they can get rid of Trump. He said, for this to happen, Republican megadonors, this is from his piece in the Wall Street Journal, Republican megadonors and influencers, large and small, are going to have to do something they didn't do in 2016. They support to agree to withdraw if and when their paths to the nomination are effectively closed. That decision should be no later than, say, February 26th, the Monday following the contest in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina. You will recall this is exactly what the Democrats did in 2020. After Jim Clyburn endorsed Joe Biden and then he won the primary there in South Carolina, all the Democratic candidates just pulled out, basically, and left the field to him. And so this is what Mitt Romney is recommending. So Donald Trump then goes nuts over on his Nazi-infested social media platform. He writes, "The loser Romney is weak, ineffective, and very bad for the Republican Party. Who could even forget Mitt proudly marching with full mask down a once proud Washington, D.C. street with Black Lives Matter protesters and rioters?" And in fact, Mitt Romney did post to Twitter a selfie that he took of himself wearing a mask, marching with Black Lives Matter folks protesting the murder of George Floyd by Derek Chauvin. He did it. Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney is also the only Republican senator to have voted twice to impeach Donald Trump. I'm starting to think Mitt Romney should be running for president again. I mean, it ain't going to happen, but is Mitt Romney the last decent Republican, or is that phrase, decent and Republican, is that just like something that we need to take out of our vocabulary, something that literally doesn't exist any longer? What do you think? I'll be back with your calls after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Right back with your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, your media support group for We the People. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Vince Houghton's Nuking the Moon and Other Intelligence Schemes and Military Plots Left on the Drawing Board. This is Chapter 7, Operation Northwoods. On April 17, 1961, more than 1,400 Cuban exiles forming the Brigada de Asalto 2506 landed on the beaches of Cuba at Playa Girón in the Bahia de Cojinos, the Bay of Pigs. Their mission was to overthrow the regime of Fidel Castro, Cuba's increasingly communist leader, who had himself overthrown the regime of American ally Batista just 2 years before. A communist leader just 90 miles from Key West was a rather painful thorn in the side of the newly inaugurated President John F. Kennedy, and his ouster was considered a high national security priority, as it had been for Kennedy's predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower. The invasion was backed by the U.S. government and the CIA. We can argue why the Bay of Pigs invasion failed until we're blue in the face, and many people still do. For many in the Cuban exile community, the mission failed because JFK refused to give American naval and air support, elements called in for the original plan developed by the Eisenhower administration. Maybe this is true. Problem here descend into the realm of the counterfactuals, the if-onlys and what-ifs, things that we are doing our damnedest to avoid. Look, I've met a lot of the Cubans who took part in that invasion, many of whom are permanently settled in or around Miami, my hometown. They are impressive men, and I wouldn't put anything past them. If they say they could have kicked out Castro with U.S. naval and air support, who am I to argue? But I still will, because things are much more complicated from an intelligence perspective. Despite the lack of air and naval support, and despite the intensity and desire of the Cuban exile forces, it would have been immeasurably difficult to overcome one of the most problematic aspects of the entire invasion. Castro not only knew they were coming, he knew when and where they were coming. A combination of piss-poor information security, or in today's parlance, InfoSec, with the ability of Cuban intelligence to infiltrate the Miami exile community meant that the secret mission to free Cuba of Castro was anything but secret. It's not like this was a huge surprise for the CIA or the U.S. military. The Cuban intelligence service was very good, and some in the exile community had loose lips. In this environment, it was nearly impossible to conduct effective counterintelligence and keep the invasion secret. Most telling of all, the Soviets had literally broadcast their knowledge of the mission 4 days before it happened. On April 13th, Radio Moscow released an English-language newscast in which they predicted an invasion of Cuba by CIA-trained exiles within the week. It seems they were trying to warn us against carrying out the invasion, a type of deterrence through propaganda. Hey, we know you're coming, so perhaps now is not a good time for your secret operation. Clearly, that didn't work. The blowback from the failed mission was significant on multiple levels. More than 100 members of the 2506 Brigade were killed in combat, along with 4 American volunteer pilots from the Alabama Air National Guard, who were contracted by the CIA. Hundreds more in Cuba would be executed in the days and weeks following the invasion, as Castro eliminated anyone suspected of abetting the exiles. More than 1,200 of the brigade would be captured by the Cuban government, and some of those members were subsequently executed. The Kennedy administration was embarrassed by the failed mission. The U.S. government looked inept and failing to maintain order even in its own backyard. In the zero-sum game of the Cold War, where victory for one of the superpowers was defeat for the other, this was a huge win for the Soviets. Not to mention that the invasion pushed Castro even more firmly into the Soviet sphere of influence. And as far as the strength of the regime was concerned, the Bay of Pigs invasion did the exact opposite of what was intended. It made Castro's regime more powerful than ever before. The operation was a great political victory for the Cubans at home and abroad. Castro was a hero in the eyes of his people for defeating the Yankee invasion and was able to consolidate his power. The fiasco also elevated the Cuban government to a newfound global status, transforming communist Cuba from an aggrieved little country to an equal in the eyes of the world. In fact, Argentinian physician turned Cuban revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara actually thanked the United States for the failed invasion. The CIA bore the brunt of the blame for the failed mission. President Kennedy fired CIA Director Allen Dulles, along with Deputy Director Charles Cabell and Deputy Director for Plans Richard M. Bissell, the 3 men who made up the core of the agency's leadership, particularly in the realm of covert action. Kennedy also removed, at least temporarily, major paramilitary operations from the purview of the CIA. For more than a decade, CIA had been the agency with primary responsibility for paramilitary covert operations, but now it was benched. Into the void leapt the U.S. military. In June 1961, about 2 months after the Bay of Pigs, President Kennedy approved National Security Action Memoranda 55, 56, and 57, which codified the shift in paramilitary responsibility from the CIA to the Pentagon. Nothing else really changed. The U.S. government was still looking for ways to oust Castro from power, just through a different government agency. By autumn, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, Brigadier General Edward Lansdale, a legendary intelligence officer, or infamous, or both, depending on your perspective, was asked to brainstorm ideas to get rid of Fidel. He didn't disappoint. In February 1962, Lansdale provided a document titled Possible Actions to Provoke, Harass, or Disrupt Cuba. Some of the actions are pretty good, some are quite silly, and some are downright abhorrent. The book is Nuking the Moon by Vince Houghton. know that every weekday we send out an email before the show giving you all the topics coming up so you can be fully informed and ready to interact with our program? Or that after the show we send out Sue's Stack, a list of every topic I've discussed along with clickable hot links to every source of information I've shared with you on the air? It's all completely free and available over at thom.tv, THOM.tv. Check it out. And welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. By the way, the Hunter Biden plea deal got blown up yesterday when a Trump-appointed judge, keep in mind he's being prosecuted by a Trump-appointed prosecutor, and he is standing before a Trump-appointed judge, and the Trump-appointed judge said, I'm not going to accept this plea deal, and put a trial on the calendar. So, things are kind of going to hell rapidly. There are, some folks who are saying, well, maybe she had a good reason for doing it and maybe it'll all work out and who knows. But keep an eye on this. The Republicans are salivating right now. They really want their Benghazi moment. They want some kind of a scandal that they can milk. Remember when Kevin McCarthy went on TV and told reporters, well, actually he was talking to Republicans, but he did it, on the record and said, look at our Benghazi hearings. We have tarnished Hillary Clinton's reputation so badly that she's dropped 3 points in the polls, or words to that effect. I mean, these are purely political prosecutions, which is why you have Trump out there claiming that the Biden administration is politically prosecuting him, when in fact it's not even the Biden administration. The special prosecutor is completely or largely disconnected from the Department of Justice. I mean, he has legal authority, but he is not marching to anybody's tune. They separated that very clearly. And also, can you imagine if Donald Trump was president and, say, the Department of Justice decided to go after one of his kids? He would issue a pardon as fast, just like that. Well, in fact, he would prevent the Department of Justice from doing that. Keep in mind, Jared and Ivanka made over $100 million during the 4 years that they were in the White House, much of it from their connections to the White House. And, nothing, not a peep. I mean, nothing out of the Democrats either, sadly. But there you go. All right, let's pick up your calls here. Jason in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Jason, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for that story about the United States and Russia in the World War I. I didn't really know that. I want to look into that. But yesterday, you were having a conversation with one of the callers about how should we handle a recovering Trump addict and how to be compassionate and or be direct and say, I don't deal with people that are making up nonsense. And then you went into that really haunting Trump ad. Where did that come from? I tried to find it yesterday, and it's super haunting. The deep state song or ad that you had. Yeah, that's what I would.
If I was the deep state, it should be fairly easy to find with a Google search. I saw it several times yesterday on my Twitter feed because right wingers are retweeting it like crazy, and and the Trump campaign is loving it. So but it's
so it actually is. It's from Trump?
No, it's not. I don't believe so. I don't believe it's an official ad from him, although it does have the official logo at the end. But okay. I think somebody just, put that in there. I think it was done by some, right-wing crank group. But Trump has been, it's not called retweeting over on Truth Social, but whatever. He has liked this thing or promoted it in some ways.
Okay.
So it shouldn't be hard to find.
Cool.
All
Thanks,
right.
Tom.
Good luck, Jason. Bye. Thanks for the call. Kathy in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Hey, Kathy, what's up?
I wanted to talk to you about the climate emergency.
Thank you.
There's something that the president can do. He can declare a climate emergency under the National Emergencies Act.
You're right. And there's two other acts under which he can do it as well. There's 3 laws altogether that he could use to declare climate emergency.
I'm not aware of the other 2, but Progressive Secretary has just released a letter that you can send to President Biden asking him to declare a climate emergency.
Good.
And their Twitter feed is at PROGSEC, and you can find more information there. But I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I wrote an op-ed about it either last Friday or Monday of this week, is saying exactly that Biden needs to declare a climate emergency. Here are the things, here are the powers that he would get if he declared a climate emergency. Here's the things he could do if he declared a climate emergency. These are the 3 laws under which he can do it. And then I wrapped it up by saying, because it's awful hard to lobby the president directly. I wrapped it up by saying, call your member of Congress at 202-224-3121 and tell them to tell the president to do this. And obviously, if you're represented by a Democrat, because the Democrats in Congress can put pressure on a president, on a Democratic president, in ways that you and I never could. So that, I'm all in favor of sending a letter, and clicking on their Twitter feed and whatnot. But don't ignore calling your member of Congress if you're represented by a Democrat.
Well, maybe we'll do a letter to Democratic members of Congress.
Yeah,
then.
Great idea.
An additional letter is not going to hurt. We could do that.
Yep, definitely. Go for it. And they're easy to find, by the way. Their websites are always the last name of the member, .house.gov or .senate.gov. So like Sanders.senate.gov kind of thing.
I work for Progressive Secretary, so we'll do the letter, and all you have to do is click, and we'll choose.
Whoop! I'm sorry. I touched my my touchpad, and I dumped you. And I put Cliff on the air. So, but I think we were finished talking. And so, Cliff in Santa Clarita, you are on the air. Cliff, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I do think the decent Republican is obsolete.
So what do we do with the Republican Party?
Well, is it up to us to do something? I mean, I think...
Well, let me rephrase that. What do you think is going to happen to the Republican Party?
I have no clue, Tom. I can't predict these things. But but what I did call about was the global warming, climate change thing. Because beyond the temperature rising and everyone dealing with that aspect of it, what isn't being discussed much is how it'll affect global food production.
You're absolutely right.
I mean, are these billionaires going to, own their own giant indoor farms and grow all their own food? Because, I mean, this whole thing is so insane.
Yep.
And it really exemplifies, it brings out the worst of humanity, the greed and selfishness of both the billionaires and their prostitute politicians that are in their pockets.
Yep.
It really is disturbing to me. And another thing, Tom, the plan is to electrify all the vehicles, right? All the cars and trucks. And hopefully we can somebody told me about a way to transform gas cars to a hydrogen powered vehicle.
Yeah, it's not you can actually, what I'm remembering is transforming a gas car into natural gas. I'm assuming that you could transform them to hydrogen because it can explode just like, volatile gasoline.
Right. Somebody had just told me that. But the thing is, Tom, what are we going to do about the planes and the jets that fly millions and millions of miles around the world?
Yeah.
There's no way to electrify those fleets, right?
Actually, there is. And it may be coming. So two data points. First off, because flying through the air has a lot less friction than driving over a road, if you are transporting yourself from place to place, flying has a much smaller carbon footprint than does driving or even taking a train. Trains might be competitive actually with that. I'm not sure about that, but certainly far better than driving. So number one. But number two, what this all has to do with is something called energy density. How much energy can be stored in a particular mass and weight. So a gallon of gasoline weighs 5.6 pounds. I learned that when I was a pilot because you have to do weight and balance stuff. And so that 5.6 pounds of gasoline, that 1 gallon of gasoline, can propel, like a little single engine airplane, a certain distance, say 50 miles, 60 miles in the air. If you can make a battery that will hold enough electricity to propel an airplane 50 or 60 miles in the air that weighs 5.6 pounds, then you can simply replace the gas tank with a battery and have an electric airplane. The problem so far has been that batteries are not as energy dense as gasoline. In other words, a battery that would have the same energy potential as a 5.6 pound gallon of gasoline typically would weigh around 11 or 12 pounds right now. It's about twice, the batteries are about 1/2 as energy dense as gasoline. That said, There is a new battery technology that Toyota announced 2 weeks ago. I did a report on it on this program that is 11 times more energy dense than the current lithium-ion batteries, which would make it more energy dense than gasoline. So, when you hit that point, then it becomes viable to build airplanes where in the wings, instead of having gas tanks, you've got batteries. Because if you've got a battery that weighs 2 or 3 pounds and holds as much energy as a gallon of gasoline at 5.6 pounds, then, now you've got an airplane that's actually more efficient than even when it was, So, I think I really believe that we will be there within a couple of years. Don't despair, is the message, Cliff.
Well, despair is not an option, and we're going to have to rely on innovative, brilliant people to get us through this.
There you go. And good old-fashioned markets. I mean, the reason they're trying to develop these batteries is because there's money to be made. Battery energy, solar energy, wind energy is now a whole lot cheaper than fossil fuel energy. Cliff, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Roya in Los Angeles. Hey, Roya, thanks for listening on KPFK. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to let you know, one of my best friends, she hates Trump or whatever, but the other day she's like, oh, I think we want to go see that Freedom movie or whatever. I said, don't you freaking dare. I said, that's a bunch of crap. It's that QAnon crap and anything that, these people are promoting, stay away from, because they're just trying to say that the Democrats are selling pizzas, whatever. I don't know, whatever the hell they were saying.
Selling children, actually, yes.
Yeah, selling children out of the pizza joints or something like that. But Hillary Clinton was in charge of it. Remember when they were talking that crap?
Yep.
But I told her, and she's like, really? I had no idea. I said, yeah. I said, I'll send you an article on it from NPR, and you can check it out, because you know what? I said, don't get suckered in because everyone else is telling you, oh, it's great, it's awesome. I said, go see Oppenheimer, go see Barbie. Forget about this movie.
There you go.
Put it to the side.
Have you seen Barbie, Roya?
I'm going to go see it tonight.
Oh, great. Okay. Louise and I saw Oppenheimer day before yesterday, and we are going to go see Barbie. The day that you see me come in here wearing a pink shirt, well, you're listening on the radio, but for people, is the day that we're going to go see Barbie.
Let's go, Barbie.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun, Tom.
Nothing like good, dumb, fun movies, right, for summer?
Heck yeah. Just go and have a good time, wear pink. Who gives a crap about the rest of these idiots? And, that Hunter Biden thing pissed me off this morning. I was like, you know what? These Trump-appointed judges, what happened to all those assassins we had? I don't know.
Oh, no, anyway. Don't even go there, Roya. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop you right there. But thank you for the call. We don't want to talk about that. Rennie in Long Beach, California. Hey, Rennie, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Glad to talk with you. A first-time caller.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. The thing that I did, I saw your segment yesterday about Fox News, and I did call my cable provider, and they put a note in my account saying that I no longer watch Fox News. So I did my part to reduce the fees that Fox News are asking the cable people to pay.
That's great. And good on you.
Yeah, it worked. It was easy. It was fast. Took about 3 minutes, and that was it. Can I ask you one more other question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. You mentioned a couple of weeks ago about Charles Schwab, and I just caught the tail end. I didn't hear everything. That you didn't have a very good experience with them.
No, it's not the company, the investment company. Although I don't have any investments with them. It's the foundation that was created with money from the company, and by the Charles Schwab family apparently, that has been funding right-wing politicians and right-wing think tanks, or at least that was the story that I was reporting on. I don't have firsthand knowledge of this. I was just citing a story that I saw from a credible source. I mean, I don't quote crackpot sources on this program, but I don't remember whether it was like the New York Times or exactly what the venue was where I read that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for clearing that up.
For your first time call into the program. Great to hear from you.
Okay.
We'll be back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day in just a moment. Stay tuned. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio and tag You're It. And welcome back, picking up your calls. Let's see here. John in Seattle. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom.
Hey.
Yeah, I been watching how things are going. I guess there's another indictment coming up today.
Well, we're not sure if it's going to happen today, but this morning, Trump's lawyers met with Jack Smith, and this is the last step before the indictment is unsealed and you get served. Is for your lawyers to go in and say, please don't do it, and for the prosecutor to say, I'm going to do it anyway, tough luck. And that's essentially what happened this morning.
So my guess is playing the guess of chess with trials starting. Since Cannon moved her trial to May, 6 months out from when Jack Smith wanted a speedy trial, I believe that opens it up for Jack Smith to go to the D.C. courts and ask for a speedy trial for December.
I think that's entirely possible, and in fact, probably probable.
Wouldn't that be great?
It would be, and because we need to nail this guy. I mean, they should have started this 2.5 years ago, but I'll take it. I will take it.
Yeah.
All right, I got to run, John. Thank you for the call. Bill in Virginia, Minnesota. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind today? Bill, watching us on YouTube in Virginia, Minnesota? Going once? Going twice? Okay, let's try Dee in Seattle. Hey, Dee, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. On the subject of climate change, two things. I was watching Democracy Now!, and they were saying that Angola prison, I think this was like last week, they don't have air conditioning and there's no windows in the cells. I think it's mostly, they were saying young black guys. It's like 130 degrees. And
yeah, there were several people who died in prisons last week.
Yeah, I thought it'd be more than that prison, but I don't know who's petitioning to have them transferred during this period or where. I don't know what group would actually do that, but also was brought up in Iran, supposedly it's like 150 degrees. I don't know how long that went for, that temperature.
Whoa. Yeah, this is happening all over the world. I mean, we saw the early warning signs of this back in 2010, 2011 with the Arab Spring. I mean, that was caused by global warming moving the deserts south in North Africa. And reducing the amount of food that could be produced. Now on top of that, you've got, Russia bombing the crap out of Ukraine's grain facilities. And so you're going to have famine in North Africa. And then on top of that, now we've got this killer heat. Large parts of the world are going to become uninhabitable if or
yeah, I was wondering with Iran, is there anything specific like anything with nuclear that go wrong, water or something weird that we're not being told about or something?
Yeah, I have no idea. But, I think that what we're going to see is cities, I believe that, this is already happening in the Middle East, in the wealthy Middle East countries. It certainly is the case in Las Vegas where, you rebuild your city, you reconfigure your city. Some northern cities do this also where, you have like skywalks from building to building so that you can, you just never have to go outside and you can travel, multiple blocks around inside the city and always have air conditioning available. And then, also they're starting to build out solar infrastructure in big ways so that they can power these cities. So, human ingenuity, I never discount the ability of humans to adapt. We're an incredibly adaptable species. But that said, we're going to be facing some really serious challenges. Dee, thank you for the call. Jim in Hillsboro, Oregon. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom.
Hey, good morning.
Thank you for putting up with me.
For what?
Thank you for putting up with me.
Oh, okay. What's on your mind, Jim?
Is this fellow Gutfeld? I guess he's a Fox commentator. Or
yeah, he's on this show, The Five, that they've got on Fox, which is kind of a pale imitation of what is it, ABC's show?
Yeah.
I forget the title of it, but anyway, I don't watch these things. But what about it?
Neither do I. Well, his recent comment about the Jews in concentration camps,
right?
And I heard that, and did that strike a chord? Because he basically, I can't remember his quote, but essentially he said that useful work.
Right. But, he's completely ahistoric. There was not, when they were doing the sorting, as they took people off boxcars, and the SS officers were either sending them to the camps, the work camp part of the camp, or the death part, the ovens, basically. They weren't asking people what skills they had. They were making decisions based on who looks able-bodied and who doesn't, and what do we need more of, and it's just Gutfeld was wrong and has been called out on it. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it the next hour, and I'll have his actual quote for you. But I'm with you, Jim. It's terrible. Okay. It's absolutely terrible. Thank you for the call, Lewis in Miami. Hey, Lewis, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. How you doing? I love your show.
Thank you.
Tom, the reason I was calling, and I didn't want to talk about climate change. What I wanted to talk about was the false elector scheme. For some reason, all the shows that I listen to and I hear, I guess, and unfortunately, the commentators, they always assume that the general public knows what's going on. For example, that each state has a slate of electors. I have no idea what that is, and I would venture to say that 99% of the general public doesn't understand that each state has electors. And how could the Trump campaign had just said, you know what, we're just going to send this false slate of electors, like if they were going to get away with it? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's how the Electoral College works.
Okay. Well,
most people don't realize you don't vote for president. What you vote for is an elector who will go to Washington, D.C. on December 15th and cast their vote for the president on behalf of you and your state. And the state has a number of electors equal to its members, to the number of members of Congress, and I think plus one or something like that. And that's how it works, basically. So, Lewis, I got to run, but thanks for I think you're absolutely right. I think most Americans, ever since the Reagan administration stopped funding civics education in public schools, or stopped federal funding for it, a lot of people just don't know our history. There's a whole chapter about this, by the way, in my new book, The Hidden History of American Democracy, about the Electoral College, how it came about and why. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
Today is Midnight in Chernobyl, the untold story of the world's greatest nuclear disaster by Adam Higginbotham. This is from the prologue. Saturday, April 26, 1986, 4:16 p.m., Chernobyl Atomic Energy Station, Ukraine. Senior Lieutenant Alexander Logachev loved radiation the way other men love their wives. Tall and good-looking, 26 years old, with close-cropped dark hair and ice-blue eyes, Logachev had joined the Soviet Army when he was still a boy. They had trained him well. The instructors from the military academy outside Moscow taught him with lethal poisons and unshielded radiation. He traveled to the testing grounds of Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan and to the desolate East Urals Trace, where the fallout from a clandestine radioactive accident still poisoned the landscape. Eventually, Logachev's training took him even to the remote and forbidden islands of Novaya Zemlya, high in the Arctic Circle, and ground zero for the detonation of the terrible Tsar Bomba, the largest thermonuclear device in history. Now, as the lead radiation reconnaissance officer of the 427th Red Banner Mechanized Regiment of the Kiev District Civil Defense Force, Logachev knew how to protect himself and his three-man crew from nerve agents, biological weapons, gamma rays, and hot particles, by doing their work just as the textbooks dictated, by trusting his dosimetry equipment, and, when necessary, reaching for the nuclear, bacterial, and chemical warfare medical kits stored in the cockpit of their armored car. But he also believed that the best protection was psychological. These men who allowed themselves to fear radiation were most at risk. But those who came to love and appreciate its spectral presence, to understand its caprices, could endure even the most intense gamma bombardment and emerge as healthy as before. As he sped through the suburbs of Kiev that morning at the head of a column of more than 30 vehicles summoned to an emergency at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Logachev had every reason to feel confident. The spring air blowing through the hatches of his armored scout car carried the smell of the trees and the freshly cut grass. His men, gathered on the parade ground just the night before for their monthly inspection, were drilled and ready. At his feet, a battery of radiological detection instruments, including a newly installed electronic device twice as sensitive as the old model, murmured softly, revealing nothing unusual in the atmosphere around them. But as they finally approached the plant later that morning, it became clear that something extraordinary had happened. The alarm on the radiation dosimeter first sounded as they passed the concrete signpost marking the perimeter of the power station grounds, and the lieutenant gave orders to stop the vehicle and log their findings. 51 roentgens per hour. If they waited here just 60 minutes, they would all absorb the maximum dose of radiation permitted Soviet troops during wartime. They drove on, following the line of high-voltage transmission towers that marched toward the horizon in the direction of the power plant. Their readings climbed still further before falling again. Then, as the armored car rumbled along the concrete bank of the station's cooling canal, the outline of the fourth unit of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant finally became visible, and Logachev and his crew gazed at it in silence. The roof of the 20-story building had been torn open, its other upper levels blackened and collapsed into heaps of rubble. They could see shattered panels of ferroconcrete, tumbled blocks of graphite, and here and there the glittering metal casings of fuel assemblies from the core of a nuclear reactor. A cloud of steam drifted from the wreckage into the sunlit sky. Yet they had orders to conduct a full reconnaissance of the plant. Their armored car crawled counterclockwise around the complex at 10 kilometers an hour. Sergeant Vlaskin called out the radiation readings from the new instruments, and Logachev scribbled them down on a map, hand-drawn on a sheet of parchment paper in ballpoint pen and colored marker. 1 roentgen per hour, then 2, then 3. They turned left and the figures began to rise quickly. 10, 30, 50, 100. 250 roentgens an hour, the sergeant shouted, his eyes widening. Comrade Lieutenant, he began, and pointed at the radiometer. Logachev looked down at the digital readout and felt his scalp prickle with terror. 2,080 roentgens an hour, an impossible number. Logachev struggled to remain calm and remember the textbook, to conquer his fear. But his training failed him, and the lieutenant heard himself screaming in panic at the driver, petrified that the vehicle would stall. Why are you going this way, you son of a bee? Are you out of your effing mind? If this thing dies, we'll all be corpses in 15 minutes. Part 1, Chapter 1, The Soviet Prometheus. At the slow beat of approaching rotor blades, black birds rose into the sky, scattering over the frozen meadows and the pearly knots of creeks and ponds lacing the Pripyat River basin. Far below, standing knee-deep in snow, his breath lingering in heavy clouds, Viktor Brukhanov awaited the arrival of the nomenklatura from Moscow. When the helicopter touched down, the delegation of ministers and Communist Party officials trudged together over the icy field. The savage cold gnawed at their heavy woolen coats and nipped beneath their tall fur hats. The head of the Ministry of Energy and Electrification of the USSR and senior party bosses from the Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine joined Brukhanov at the spot where their audacious new project was to begin. Just 34 years old, clever and ambitious, a dedicated party man, Brukhanov had come to Western Ukraine with orders to begin building what would become the greatest nuclear power station on Earth. Midnight at Chernobyl.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us, our old buddy Phil Ittner, the veteran war correspondent based in Kyiv, Ukraine. You can watch his video blog, which he regularly updates over on YouTube. Just search for his name, Philip Ittner, Philipittner. And Phil, welcome back to the program. Last time we talked, your Twitter account had gotten hacked. What's the latest on that?
It's gone. It's been expelled. The guy who took it over was a far right wing, or the guy who hacked into it and then cloned onto it was a very extreme far right guy who was calling for all sorts of disgusting things. So good riddance. It's now just my name, but in reverse, Ittner Philip.
Oh, okay, great. On I guess it's X now rather than Twitter.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Yeah. So Putin says that he is offering free grain to at least 6 African countries. He's trying to shore up Russia's image after, bombing the crap out of Odessa and the grain facilities, and ending the deal. Can we talk for a minute about the impact this will have on the world and whether Russia actually has enough grain to supply these, to replace the grain? My understanding was that about 10% of the entire world's grain supply that is used in inter-country commerce comes from one country, Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, it's agriculturally fertile ground. I mean, quite literally, it's this black soil that exists here because of the various glacial movements and all the rest of it. But boy, this place it's just, you can grow almost anything here, and it's a significant exporter of grain. Now, can Russia supplement it? Yeah, sure. They have their own grain fields as well. In addition, they've stolen quite an awful lot of grain from the occupied territories that they hold here in Ukraine. Will it make up the difference? Probably not. But also, there are other ways to get Ukrainian grain out than simply by sea. We learned that last year. So this is not necessarily a catastrophe. We're not anywhere near that at this point. But unless serious preparations are made, we could see a catastrophe. So it's still comparatively calm. There's no reason to panic or unduly freak out. But it is something obviously worth considering and keeping your mind on. But what we see in St. Petersburg with Vladimir Putin trying to kind of get various African nations on board with what Russia is doing by means of kind of greasing the wheels with what they can export, kind of in Ukrainian eyes is seen as a really cynical ploy, that they don't really care about Africa. They're just using food as a weapon. And if you know your Ukrainian history, that's a pretty despicable thing to do.
Yeah, the Holodomor, when 4 million Ukrainians died of famine because of Joe Stalin. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. That's what I'm referring to. And it's prescient on every Ukrainian's mind. The fact that the Russians are using food as a weapon yet again in Ukraine.
Yeah.
I've spoken to many Ukrainians who really, it's like salt in their wounds.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, meanwhile, Moldova has kicked out Russian diplomats. Don't they have
43, I believe it was.
Yeah, isn't there a strip within their country that is occupied by Russia? Or am I thinking of a different country?
No, that's Moldova. It's a strip called Transnistria. It's a very small little sliver where after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there remain some Russian elements there. And it led many to believe that actually what Russia's military objectives were at the beginning of this war was to go along the coast and link up with Transnistria and in effect cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea. Obviously, that never came to pass, and it's highly unlikely that it would. There are not a lot of Russian soldiers in Transnistria, but it is a spoiler, and Moldova has had a long history of being meddled with by Moscow. And so that's what I think has led to this expulsion of the diplomats. Is that, I mean, there was a case proven about 2 years ago, I want to say, in which they had on video Russians supporting Moldovans with briefcases, filled with money, trying to bribe various, politicians in the country. They are a massive spoiler inside Moldova. So it should come as no surprise that Chisinau, the capital, is kicking out those Russians.
Yeah, so this seems like a good sign then that Moldova is not going to be taken over by Russia. I believe today is day 520 of the Ukraine war. And the counteroffensive was essentially declared, 2-3 weeks ago? How is it going?
A little bit older than that. Slow. There's a lot of defensive lines and defenses that Russia has installed there. We're hearing in the last 24 hours or so that actually Ukraine is starting to make incremental advances in what is called the Donetsk front, and that's out near Bakhmut and all that kind of stuff, and the Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk, and then down south in what's called the Zaporizhia front, there's also advances being made. Nothing enormous. I can't stress this enough. Every time I get a chance to speak to an audience, I try to make this point. And we've talked about this in the past. This is not, don't think that this is going to be lightning strikes and, gobbling up kilometers or miles of ground and encircling Russian troops. And that may happen if an opening is exploited. But the Ukrainians have made it very clear that they are going to do in the military, in the U.S. Army. I've been embedded with the Army enough times to have learned this one, is they have a slogan. And I'll see if I can get it right the first time here. Slow is steady, steady is smooth, smooth is fast. So we're not going to expend our people. We are not going to rush into anything. We are going to gobble up kilometers. We're going to gobble up territory as we push eastward to the sea. That's the objective. Get to the sea and cut off Russia from the Crimean Peninsula, their land bridge from the Crimean Peninsula. And in addition to that, because of the discrepancy between Russia's population that they can draw upon, by the way, we're anticipating another conscription period over in Russia, but their population is much larger than Ukraine. So, and also Ukraine fights differently. They aren't quite as willing to throw their forces into the meat grinder. They want to keep them alive because they have fewer of them. And also a soldier who survives is a more experienced soldier and he knows how to fight better. So they're not going to just chuck Ukrainian forces against the defensive lines of the Russians. They're going to take it very slow and steady. That's what we're seeing happen. There's been criticism in the West about that, but we are starting to see some movement in these two sectors, and there's scuttlebutt and talk of that only kind of increasing.
Yeah. Finally, I read that Moscow has said, and I don't recall if it was Putin or just one of their spokespeople, that the introduction of F-15s or other aircraft capable of carrying nuclear weapons into this theater of war, into Ukraine,
will be considered the crossing of the nuclear line and will therefore authorize or legitimize a massive and overwhelming response from Russia that that they've been holding back on up to this point. Am I remembering that correctly? And how seriously should we take that? What does this mean?
Well, that's the F-16, and it's something the Ukrainians have been asking for since the beginning of this conflict, or this larger scale conflict, because the Russians are right. It has a multi-purpose platform. You can put all sorts of, air-to-air defense missiles, air-to-surface, all sorts of different kit can be put on the F-16, including, missiles that have a warhead capable of carrying something nuclear. So that's what the Russians are referring to. And in their stated doctrine, in Russia's stated doctrine for all to read, is we will only use our nukes in a defensive posture. But what is a defensive posture if that's what they start to say is a sign of aggression that they will then, in their mindset, be defending against? So would they actually do it the second an F-16 goes into the air over Ukraine? I mean, do we really want to roll that dice? I'm not sure, but the Ukrainians certainly say they need it, and there are military experts and there are guys who are coming from the front lines saying that we do need better systems in the air, and they'd like it to be the F-16. Look, Russia has drawn red lines in the sand in the past, and they've been crossed. But at some point, you wonder whether or not it's going to be one red line too far. As much as I want to see the Ukrainians succeed on the battleground and in the air, we can't. We have to be cautious in all things because obviously Russia's a nuclear power. So that raises another question. And my understanding is that, and I believe you and I discussed this last week, but it's worth revisiting that. Russia has moved their, or at least some of their, tactical nuclear weapons into Belarus, and the Wagner Group is now in Belarus. Is it possible that the use of nuclear weapons, Russian tactical nuclear weapons, could be done by the Wagner Group in order to provide some sort of plausible deniability for the Russian military? Well, you paint a scary scenario there, but look, if the Wagner Group were to launch, to be used as a proxy to launch a nuclear attack, I think all auspices of that actually being ordered by Yevgeny Prigozhin will go right out the window. Everybody's going to know if a nuke is used in this region, who ordered it and who, quite frankly, pulled the trigger. So the question, but then remains, as always, when it comes to Russia's threat of using nuclear weapons, is what happens afterwards? What's the immediate response? And the immediate response, unless it is a full-scale exchange of nuclear stockpiles, in which, we're just done, that's it. But short of that, it's what happens the day after. And what happens, it's out of various capitals around the Western world, is that's it. That's a game changer. Then the use of nuclear weapons by Moscow would initiate all sorts of.
This could escalate into World War III, even if it's not a nuclear war.
Absolutely, a conventional war sparked by a limited nuclear exchange.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I get it. Phil, thanks a lot for the call, or thanks for the conversation. Phil Ittner, you check him out on YouTube. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Tom.
We'll be back. And welcome back. Karen in New Orleans. Hey, Karen.
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Hot, but good. A previous caller talked about Charles Schwab, and it sounds like a real sinister manipulation of finances. But tell me what you know or think of Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum over there in Davos. And there's something called the Roman Club in
It's called the Club
Canada.
of Rome.
Club of Rome. That's it. In Canada, and I just heard about this one. This is a new one on me. But tell me, what do you?
I don't know anything about anybody named Schwab having anything to do with Davos, but Davos is basically a high status club, annual opportunity to see and be seen for the world's billionaires and political leaders.
Right.
The Club of Rome is a group of essentially progressive deep thinkers. A friend of mine, David Corton, is a member of that. He wrote the book When Corporations Rule the World. He's been on this program many times. And the Club of Rome has published a lot of great research over the years about things like the threats of climate change and the threats of fascism. So they're and it's not quite a think tank. It's more like a loose association of people who know each other who are well, like I said, deep thinkers. Very, very smart people. So no need to flip out or go into conspiracy theory mode here.
Well, it's not. It's just I'm doing a lot more research on Klaus Schwab, and I just wanted to know your
I know nothing about him. I'm sorry, Karen. Karen, thank you for the call.
Sweetie.
Good to hear from you.
Thank you.
Yep. Herbert in Atlanta. Hey, Herbert, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I want to tell the American people what a sham and a scam these UFO hearings are.
Okay.
You can Google up that Dwight Eisenhower met with aliens. You can go on Google it up. Dwight Eisenhower met with aliens 3 times. I forgot.
I'm not buying it.
Well, Google it up, Tom. Google it up.
Just because it's on the internet doesn't make it true, Herbert.
Well, if you look at the reason why I'm saying this, because back in the day, this a long time ago, I was very, very involved in this, and is my opinion based on what I was investigating at that time, that John Kennedy, you can pull this up, John Kennedy, when he was president, he came down to Florida to see an alien casket. And he saw it. And it is based on my investigation, okay? If you look at the Tuesday after Kennedy was assassinated, why did they change?
Well, here's a question for you, Herbert. If these guys are smart enough to create interstellar spacecraft that can go through, a billion miles of space dust and meteorites and crazy, extraterrestrial stuff, why are they crashing into the Earth like drunken teenagers?
Well, those based on my investigation, those are the planes that we're trying to re-engineer.
I'm just not buying it. I mean, I'm perfectly willing to believe. In fact, I'm certain that this universe is well populated with life and intelligent life. There's no doubt in my mind. But whether it's made its way here or not, and if it has, like I said, why are they crashing into us like drunk teenagers? I don't get it. Herbert, I got to run. Thank you for the call. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So back in 1933, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, we were in the depths of the Great Depression. He raised the top income tax rate on billionaires from 25% to 90%. The ultra-rich were screaming, and here's what he had to say.
A number of my friends who belong in the very high upper bracket have suggested to me on several occasions of late that if I am re-elected president, they will have to move to some other nation because of high taxes here. Now, I will miss them very much.
He just took it right to them, right? Now, what came out of that was the world's largest and fastest growing and first major middle class. We can do this again. We just have to raise taxes on rich people. It's pretty straightforward. There's a whole article about it over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. 24 minutes past the hour. It was another lie. This creative 303 decision, the Supreme Court decision, where this Christian designer, Laurie Smith, came to the Supreme Court with this group that is supporting her, and I got the name of the group here someplace, Alliance Demanding Freedom, and claimed that she lives in Colorado, that Colorado had a state law that says you may not discriminate against people based on their gender or sexual orientation. And she wanted to discriminate against gay people. She did not want, and she said, I have been prevented, essentially, from starting a website business selling websites for weddings because I'm afraid that a gay couple will come to me and I will say no and they will sue me under this law. And in fact, a gay couple did come to me and I am terrified. That was basically her message that she laid out before the Supreme Court. Well, it turns out that the gay couple that she said came to her, or the man who wanted to marry his husband that she said came to her, was a lie. This guy actually, he's an actual person. He lives in San Francisco, but he's straight. He's been married for 15 years. He's got a kid and a wife. So that was a lie. And now it turns out that her saying that she couldn't create these websites, that was the tort, right? That was the injury that allowed this to get before the Supreme Court. That her claim was also a lie because she had been creating websites for weddings. And in fact, there was one on her website promoting her web work that she took down just before she took this case to the Supreme Court. But you can see it on the Wayback Machine on the internet. Over at the New Republic, they've nailed her for this. This whole 303 Creatives case. Mark Joseph Stern writes over at Slate, Lori Smith and her lawyers at Alliance Defending Freedom repeatedly told the Supreme Court that she had never, ever made a wedding website because she was afraid a same-sex couple might then request her services. That was a lie. The wedding website Lori Smith did make was scrubbed from the internet. The chief counsel for Sheldon Whitehouse's Senate Judiciary Committee, Alex Aronson, writes, quote, evidence continues to mount that the anti-LGBT extremist group Alliance Defending Freedom committed a fraud on the Supreme Court in its cooked-up 303 Creative case. Drexel University professor of law David Cohen says apparently nothing about this case was true. NBC News senior reporter Ben Collins sums it up. This case, he says, continues to absolutely reek, and nothing is being done about it. And now it is legal all across the United States to discriminate against gay people. And I'll tell you more about that in the third hour, because it's now Florida has put this into law. It's getting wild out there.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truth, 6 Republicans on the Supreme Court would really rather you didn't know. I'll be back with your calls on the other side of this break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today for the It was first published in 1993. This is from Chapter 1, titled Detoxing. Today's revolutionary need is to detox ourselves from the old, stereotyped political formulas from 20 or 30 years ago, without which we cannot deal with neocolonialism. A while ago, I was watching a Malcolm X Day program, and the main speaker ended by militantly reciting Malcolm X's famous phrase, "the ballot or the bullet." Haven't you caught the same thing? X, most fresh of all thinkers, is being turned into the equivalent of Lenin or Mao's corpse on ceremonial display. For when X threw down that slogan a generation ago, it was then timely and on point. Black people were struggling for freedom against colonial conditions, and most had neither the ballot nor the bullet. The militant question was which would be picked up. Now the black nation is struggling for its life against neo-colonial conditions, and new African people have lots of ballots and lots of bullets. Everywhere you have African city governments, African officials and African executives, African soldiers, African shooters, and African posses. You might say that the black nation is dying from too much
ballots and bullets, but not radical enough truths, perhaps. Under colonialism, the oppressed were largely kept disarmed. Now it's all reversed. Imperialism, as a neo-colonial system, races not to disarm, which is hopeless in this age, but to arm the oppressed in its own way, whether it's posses or paratroopers, children included, naturally. Feminists say women should get self-defense. Does that threaten imperialism? Then why is Smith & Wesson making the Ladysmith, a .38 subnose specially sized for women? Is the government of white men doing anything to stop women from owning handguns? The ranks of white women who've done so are over 15 million and climbing. Be real. In the Ivory Coast and Somalia, men and boys in rags and bare feet have AK-47s and grenades. In New York and Los Angeles, kids too young for learner's permits got Raven 258 or a deuce-deuce, or maybe even a TAC-9. What's the firepower of the old Black Liberation Army compared to the Crips in Compton or the Jamaica posses just in Flatbush? Get the Uzi is successful slang because it plays off reality we all know. More than a few new African children say personally they got to be more afraid of black people than white people. So how useful is the liberal left habit of playing low to the crowd with old anti-colonial rhetoric? It used to be that dissing the white man was a crime or close to it, dangerous for sure, like life-threatening if a black man or woman did it. Now it's so tame that Fox or ABC give it to us as a sitcom. There's even some college courses on how to diss the white man. He may not like it, but who cares? Imperialism doesn't care, that's for sure. Even white women are doing it now as a substitute for doing anything real. It's like running in place. As Rodney, the Guyanese revolutionary scholar, pointed out, it's counterproductive to solve the neo-colonial situation, or counterproductive to solving the neo-colonial situation. Revs still cling to the old ideas and ways, in part because we don't want to admit how ignorant we are now. This runs deeper, though. Anti-colonial politics are the culmination of 400 years of our struggle. They are the products of the best minds we had, of destroying old societies, of oppressed people challenging the world in uprisings, pushing farther and farther. These old views are already fully developed, well-honed. More than that, the old anti-colonial politics are developed in the most profound sense, in having been widely diffused and taken hold of by the oppressed, put to use already. So when Revs talk about that old talk, walk that old walk, it's not only familiar, but reassuring and to a certain degree popular. We all take for granted now that the anti-colonial consciousness and changes. It's become the normal. That's what's our due. A few years ago, Nelson Mandela was the most famous terrorist POW in the world. In 1990, when he made his triumphant visit here, he was not only greeted by massive crowds of well-wishers, but schools and churches throughout the black nation held special programs to honor him. City governments and the U.S. Congress itself had to organize welcomes for him. Like it or not, white men had to smile and applaud him. And last year, by any means necessary T-shirts with Malcolm's picture on them were more common in many streets than Budweiser T-shirts. And you can't take it to mean anything extreme or radical. The old anti-colonial awareness has already been generalized widely, absorbed by people and society itself into daily life. So let's break that down. When a tiny Klan faction based in North Carolina to the U.S. Capitol from a rally on Labor Day weekend 1990, it took over 2,000 cops in riot gear to hold the angry crowds back. The D.C. New African community was outraged that any Klan dared to march in their city, which is 70% black, on their territory. Ephi Berry, the then wife of the then mayor, Marion Berry, came out and brought her 10-year-old son. Hey, if you like the rants that I open the show with every day, they're typically published over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Picking up your phone calls here. A lot to talk about today, huh? And we're still on, indictment watch. Robinson in West Lynn, Oregon. Hey, Robinson, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hello. We have a 2-for-1 deal. we may eliminate upwards of 15% of U.S. global warming emissions and other pollutants, and stop monopoly power. The monopoly power of North American privately owned railroads needs to be stopped. And my colleague Tom White addresses this in his 10-minute book promotion video, Climate Emergency Trains and Effective Response, a book by the same title. Highly urge both you and your listeners, to watch and rewatch this video, get the book. What more can I tell you, please? What do you think?
No, I think I got it, Robinson, and it sounds like a great book and a great movie. Thank you for the information. Joseph in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Joseph, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I want to cite, Trump is about to get indicted, and he's asked members of Congress to find a way to protect him.
All right.
That means they're enablers to his crimes. Okay, in an article published Saturday, July 31st, 2021, it says, I'm not going to read the whole thing. It says, former President Donald Trump pressured active Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen to just say the election was corrupt and leave it up to me and the Republican Congress.
Correct.
Trump said on a call.
That's right.
And it was, yeah, you know about it, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I saw the testimony during the January 6th hearings in Congress.
So what I'm going to ask you is this: if congressmen aren't indicted along with Donald Trump, then what are we to do?
Yeah, I agree. Some of them may have some minor immunity from the speech and debate clause in the Constitution, but there is a clear exception for treason and sedition in that clause. And in particular, these meetings in mid-December that Trump was having with Marjorie Taylor Greene, with Scott Perry, with Paul Gosar, I believe, some of these other members of Congress. There's a handful of them, and Mark Meadows, of course. And Meadows has apparently become a government witness. He's now refusing to discuss January 6th. I mean, a month ago, he was all over right-wing media talking about January 6th. He had no problems talking about it. And now, all of a sudden, he's shut up. And typically, you only do that when you have entered into a cooperation agreement with the government and you are now forbidden from speaking other than on the witness stand. And so if Meadows, who was there through the whole thing and, hardcore right-winger and was Trump's chief of staff during that period of time and did not resign after January 6th like Bill Barr did, if Meadows has flipped on Trump, that's probably going to be a huge, big deal. And whether Meadows will flip on other members of Congress. And the other person I'm watching that I would love to see Jack Smith investigating, but I'm guessing it's just, he's just terrified to go close to. Although who knows? This guy, has some real courage. But the other one is Ginny Thomas, Clarence Thomas's wife. She was in the middle of an awful lot of this stuff, and she was actively, corresponding with Mark Meadows about the need to overturn the election. So, is she going to be next? I don't know the answers to any of those questions, Joseph, but I know the questions. Joseph, thanks for the call. It was a great one. Bill in Virginia, Minnesota. Hey, Bill, let's try it again. What's on your mind today?
Well, I was interested in talking about, I watched C-SPAN this morning, and there was a young man representative, I believe it was the Federal Reserve. They're talking about interest rates, and he made the statement that was very difficult to understand where the inflation came from. And I'd kind of like to clear something up for him, because the invasion of Russia into Ukraine occurred 2/24/22, and then by let's see, it was March, we had 65% increase per gallon in gasoline.
Right.
And by June 7th, it was over $5 a gallon. And I believe that you can trace that right down to the beginning of the inflation, because nothing that's transported, grown, or otherwise handled does it without energy.
Yeah, and not only that, Bill, the 2021 and 2022 were literally the most profitable years in the history of the fossil fuel industry for the fossil fuel industry. And
yeah,
I think
Bernie pointed out how their extreme profits occurred after that.
Yeah, there's some serious price gouging going on, and this tracks back to monopolies in the United States. You know, when Reagan in 1983 ordered the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission to stop enforcing the nation's antitrust laws, we went from, you know, in 83, and, you know, some of us are old enough to remember this, in 1983, your local mall was all locally owned stores. There might have been a Sears or a Montgomery Ward's that was the anchor store for the mall, but all those other stores were local stores. Every strip mall, downtown was full of locally owned businesses. You know, local communities, small towns were thriving. They've all now been wiped out by giant monopolistic chains. And you know, so you could go anywhere in America and have no idea where you are anymore. It used to be, you know, the local bank was, you know, this is the Tuscaloosa Bank. You know, now it's Wells Fargo or Chase. You know, it used to be the local restaurant and hotel was the Tuscaloosa Restaurant or Hotel, or the Johnson Family Hotel. Now it's all, you know, Marriott or Olive Garden kind of stuff. Or, you know, so we need to be enforcing our antitrust laws, because I think about 1/3 of the inflation that we were experiencing was coming from pent-up demand from, you know, post-COVID. We saw the same thing after the flu pandemic in the which is why, you know, both inflation and the economy exploded in 1921. So we saw the same thing in the Roaring '20s. About 1/3 of it is coming from just, you know, corporate greed because Reagan stopped enforcing our anti-monopoly laws. And about 1/3 of it is coming as a consequence of the invasion of Ukraine and Russia and Saudi Arabia basically getting together and saying, let's drive up the price of oil because we need some cash. I'm with you, Bill. Bill, thank you very much for the call and for making that point. Chris in Olympia, Washington. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to see what you're thinking about the DNC rigging the primary to coronate Biden. We've seen in New Hampshire, they're not giving Marianne Williamson voter data, which is standard for Democratic candidates. In South Carolina, they're doing the same thing. They took her money, but they're not giving her the voter data. And the national DNC is not allowing primary debates. I just wanted to hear what you're thinking about that.
You know, this is not uncommon when you've got a sitting president who's running for re-election, and you've got people challenging him who have absolutely no chance of becoming president, and, you know, are basically just trying to up their own profiles. The Democratic Party is not taking those candidacies, hers or Bobby Kennedy's, seriously, and I think, you know, that's not unreasonable. Chris, so I'm not as outraged about it as apparently you are. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. So you were talking about energy density, comparing a 5.6 gallon of gasoline to a same weight of a battery.
Right.
But the problem is there are other equations in the system, and one of them is we sacrifice efficiency with density. At least the way we have it set up now, is that most of the energy that's liberated when you burn a gallon of gas is wasted in heat.
Correct.
And yeah, so you probably know this better than I do, but I remember thinking that the vast percentage of heat when you drive your car is wasted in the heat of the combustion and also the friction that the whole moving, all of it creates, and the friction with
my understanding is the cars are about 32, 34. It's been a while since I read the article about it. In the low 30% conversion of energy and gasoline into kinetic energy, into motion, whereas an electric car is over 90% efficient in terms of taking the energy that's in that battery and converting it into kinetic, you know, into moving the car.
Right, and then you look at a nuclear power plant. They're just gigantic water boilers, and that's mostly wasted energy too.
That's right.
It's all prolific, but if you have to cool off the core, you're wasting the energy you just created.
Yep.
The heat you just created, if you have to cool it off, is being wasted. So if you compare it to like biological systems, like how we oxidize carbon sources, and we can't afford to raise the heat of our bodies. So the electrons transport is very efficient. And the reason is because we have to have heat density because we need more power, which is work per unit time, and we need everything done. Time is money, so we need everything done yesterday. Therefore, we have to borrow the hours of ancient sunlight, and this is the result.
Yeah.
Because we need everything done because time is money. Whereas if you think about the energy it costs to go down 2 miles down to the store, if you take your car and all of the energy that actually really is versus if you want to walk to the store, all you have to do is eat. They are not even comparable.
You're right.
How much energy is being wasted because you got to get down there and back, and it's all about because we have to have everything done yesterday. If I could say real quick, Tom, there is a new show on WCPT on Sunday evenings at 6 p.m. Central called Kitchen Table Progressive, featuring yours truly and another associate of yours. Please tune in.
Really?
Sundays at 6 p.m. Central.
So you've got a show now on WCPT, Paul? Is that what you're telling me?
That's what I'm telling you.
Congratulations. That's great. I'm sure you'll do great. Who's your co-host?
Somebody you know.
But you're not going to reveal it? Is it a secret?
That's not a secret. It's a person on the Thom Hartmann staff by the name of Joyce Nance.
Oh, Joyce? Joyce? Oh, Joyce?
Yeah, you know her, right?
How cool. No, I didn't know. That's great. Congratulations to both of you. I'm surprised she didn't tell me. But I'm all in favor of it. I think that's marvelous. So...
Well, thanks for letting me put the plug in.
I'm happy happy you did it, and congratulations, Paul. I got to run, but thanks for the call. 46 minutes past the hour. The Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Helping you win the water cooler wars. I'll be right back with more of your calls. And welcome back. Mitchell in Hillsboro, Illinois. Hey, Mitchell, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, good to be with you. Hey, when you're talking about the Republican Party, it's not a few bad apples. It's a rotten orchard. This orchard needs to be ripped out by the root and thrown away. I don't really care if they replace it or not.
Well, we do need a two-party system. I mean, the Democrats, as much as I'm, respectful and fond of the Democratic Party, it needs opposition. That's a healthy thing.
Yeah, well, I was going to say I had respect at one time for Republicans that had a good conservative attitude towards fiscal responsibility.
Yeah, Dwight Eisenhower was a great president, for example.
You what?
Dwight Eisenhower, for example, was a great president in many regards. I mean, there were some parts of his policies, some of his foreign policy stuff, particularly in Central America, and some of his racial stuff was, shall we say, subpar. But generally speaking,
they're brothers and the fruit factories, yeah.
Yeah, but back in the day, we had Republicans that were at least reasonable. Now it's become a cult.
Yeah, well, my dad was a Republican. He was an Eisenhower Republican. Matter of fact,
too.
His Eisenhower Republican carried him over when he voted twice for Reagan, which he ended up saying he regretted after it was all over with.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, the Republican. I have respect for any conservative that has a conservative attitude, any Republican, I mean, that has a conservative attitude towards fiscal responsibility.
Yeah.
I would like to see our debt, handled, but apparently money really doesn't mean much anymore.
Yeah, there you go. Mitchell, thank you for the call. Paul in Ambler, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I have a I think a good little bit of news today. It was announced that GDP grew at a rate of 2.4% for the second quarter annually, right? On an annualized basis.
Right.
But the reason why this is newsworthy is if you watch the business news report, all they could say was, well, when the recession comes, well, they've been saying this for about a year and a half.
Right.
And the recession hasn't been coming.
Right.
In fact, it's the exact opposite thing. And you've got huge capital investments that have been going on for the past year, twice the rate of 2021. Yep. 2022 saw twice the amount of money. Now, they're doing things partially because of under the Trump administration during the pandemic, they passed a lot of money out. Then when Biden got in, they passed two major spending bills, one for infrastructure and the other one for, they call it an anti-inflation, but it's really a giant Green New Deal plus a whole bunch of other things that are thrown in there for good measure. And what I think we're really seeing is the vindication and the reemergence of Keynesian economics, where the government is providing.
Biden has declared this.
What's that?
Biden has declared this. I don't think he's literally said, I'm a Keynesian, but he has said that, he's rejecting neoliberalism and he's going back to New Deal economics. That's John Maynard Keynes.
He's called Bidenomics.
Yep.
He was in Philadelphia where we have a shipbuilding facility. They're building an enormous ship that erects these gigantic windmills in the Atlantic Ocean, the size of the Empire State Building.
Wow.
The base is 1,000 feet tall, and the wingspan on this, you wouldn't believe.
That's great. Paul, I'm sorry, I'm out of time, but thank you for the call. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Between 40 years of Ronald Reagan's neoliberalism destroying the American middle class and all the just horrors of January 6th and the Trump presidency, America's waking up, and that's a really good thing. There's actually, some books coming out about this. Mine, The Hidden History of Democracy. Neil Howe's The Fourth Turning is here. And it looks like a moment of American renaissance is upon us, if our media doesn't screw it up, which raises the question, can we have democracy and Fox News? Can the two coexist? Like, when Fox News runs chyrons saying that essentially Joe Biden is a wannabe dictator who's throwing Trump in jail because he's his political opponent. There's a whole rant about this and an in-depth analysis of what can we do with regard to repairing our media here in the United States over at HartmannReport.com. I think you'll find it interesting. Check it out. "52 minutes past the hour." Brian in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning. Here in Albuquerque, like most other American cities, we have a shortage of housing, and especially affordable housing for young people starting out in life. And I think it's more instructive in politics if we talk about issues together. Like, let's talk about housing plus climate change plus immigration. I think we all know that climate change is going to get worse before it gets better, and that's going to put a big pressure on immigrants coming into the United States as well as Europe and other places. So all these desirable cities are going to have thousands, if not millions, of people moving into them in the next 20 years. And we have a shortage of housing right now.
Yeah.
And we want to remake the energy grid right now. If we look at our current housing stock, most of it's, I think the average age is about 40 years old.
Yeah.
So a lot of it needs to be replaced anyway. A lot of it's deficient. So I think if some enterprising Democrat or any American politician would start talking about this, I mean, it's so obvious.
Well, California has, like, for example, they're requiring all new houses to have solar installations, which is a great first step. We have a huge problem, though, Brian, here in the United States with with these giant hedge funds and vulture capitalists, the private equity groups buying up housing stock. I mean, in some communities, there was a community in Tennessee, for example, where almost half of the houses are now owned by a hedge fund, which then jacks up the price of and they've all been turned into rentals, and then they jack up the price of rental because now they control more than half of the rental stock in the city. And plus you've got overseas investors buying up residential houses, and a lot of other countries just bar that.
Can I make another statement?
You may.
All right. I think that answer is kind of a deflection, because here, in reality, this is what I see. Progressives are A-OK with high levels of immigration into the United States, and on balance, immigration is a good thing. But we don't talk about where all these immigrants are going to live. See, let's put 2 plus 2 together and come up with the obvious solution instead of just keeping.
No, I'm agreeing with you that we need more housing.
In another little corner.
We definitely need more housing. We need better housing.
That?
We need smarter housing, and we need affordable housing. And like I said, there's a bunch of forces working against affordable housing, and we could do something about that. We could, at the state level or even at the federal level, we could say, an individual or a corporation may not own more than 5 single-family residences, for example. Instead of.
But there's still a supply and a demand issue that's not being addressed.
I agree.
We got to address supply and demand.
What's your solution for that?
I think we need a national program on how to come up with affordable housing units and how do we construct them in a most energy efficient way so they're the most energy efficient housing unit possible. Yeah. But see, no one's talking about it. It's left off on the sideline, and we deal with these day-to-day squabbles about silly things, in my opinion, instead of talking about what's really going to happen in the next decade or two. Yeah. We're building a future for our children. Let's think about all the young people you know and love in your life, and think about what their life is going to be in 20 or 30 years. I mean, judging by most of your callers and myself, a lot of us aren't going to be around in 20 or 30 years. But think about the young people you know and love and what their life is going to be like, and start coming up with serious answers instead of all these daily squabbles about something that happened 100 years ago.
Yeah, I'm with you, Brian. We need a comprehensive, multifaceted solution to housing, to homelessness, which is a dimension of the housing problem, and to climate change. And they can all, you're right, they could all work together. And immigration. Thank you. Thank you for the call, Brian. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Is Gen Z speaking of young people, about to hand off the baton in the 2024 election? And do Democrats have a plan for retaking the South? And Florida doctors now can refuse to provide services to gay people. Say what? We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
It's a collection of essays. This one is by David Gilbert on page 31, titled "The System Within the System, the Prison Industrial Complex and Imperialism." For those of us held behind locked gates within the walls and fences topped with razor wire, the corrections regime is the system that works tirelessly to impose total control over every aspect of our lives. Yet as ponderous and powerful as prisons are, they're only one part, a central girder, of a much bigger and more foreboding house of horrors, which can most accurately be named imperialism. The structural needs of the larger edifice set the specifications for the size and position of the girder. The strength of the girder helps determine how long the building itself will stand. We can't understand the explosion of imprisonment in the United States since 1971 without looking at an imperialism's urgent needs and goals of that period. By the same token, we can't develop an effective program around the prison industrial complex without grappling with the stresses and trends of the larger system of imperial rule. To be clear, before you take time to read this chapter, I don't offer any brilliant ideas on strategy. Those will most likely emerge from the organizing and activist efforts themselves. However, some of the concerns discussed may raise questions that go into forming strategy. I definitely look forward to learning from the dialogues that this generates on these issues. Imperialism may sound like the kind of rhetoric we want to avoid, but it's one word that needs to be rescued as the best way to name the system that rules over us. The basis of imperialism is the relentless quest for profits around the globe. Its most striking characteristic is the colossal and grotesque polarization of wealth. That polarization happens between nations, between the rich countries of the North and the impoverished ones of the global South, the impoverished countries of Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, and at the same time within each country based on class, race, and gender. The poles of dazzling wealth and abject poverty are intimately linked, as the former results from the ruthless plunder of the latter. This system is built on and intensifies all the major forms of oppression: patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, all of which are structurally central. At the same time, imperialism highlights the global character of the system in a way that explains why the most intense oppression and resistance have been in the South, and that also provides the context for why the liberation struggles of the various people of color have been in the forefront within the U.S. There's no way to capture what the system costs in human life and potential, the pain and loss for all of us. Close to 1 billion human beings suffer chronic hunger, while another 2 billion face nutritional deficiencies. 1 billion lack access to clean drinking water. Just looking at children under the age of 5, imperialism is a holocaust in progress. Over 9 million die every year from easily preventable causes associated with poverty. The price for future generations may be even more severe as the rapaciousness of this global frenzy for profits threatens the very ecological basis for sustaining human life on any scale on our planet. Since most people won't accept living in squalor amid plenty, imperialism entails both the most sophisticated and the most brutal forms of social control. Its most salient feature is war, war after war after war, mainly against the peoples of the South. The domestic front line of such repression is a truly violent and harmful prison industrial complex. Today, 2,300,000 people are held behind bars, about 7 times the number in 1971. That explosion was unprecedented, coming after a 70-year period when the rates of imprisonment had remained more or less constant. This dramatic change did not result from some sudden skyrocketing of criminal activity, but rather from a radical expansion of what was designated as a crime and a draconian increase in the punishments for those crimes. Such extreme measures were driven by considerations way beyond criminal justice and often at cross purposes to the proclaimed goal of public safety. These destructive changes were born from crisis, one much more severe and protracted than the periodic ups and downs of the business cycles that occur over a roughly 10-year period, but rather a situation that threatened the very survival of the system. Such structural crises occur because capitalism is by its nature unstable. The economy is vast and complicated, but the major decisions are made by a tiny corporate and financial elite, with each thinking only of his own profits. When a structural crisis develops, the long-term institutional arrangements that assured a reliable flow of profits and the rule of capital no longer function. One dramatic example was the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II. At the end of that period, a new set of international institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, were created. At the same time, a new deal was hammered out for the terms of the bargain between capital and labor within the U.S. Those arrangements worked well for capital until they broke down a generation later. That new structural crisis, which emerged between 1968 and 73, is the seedbed for the burgeoning of the prison industrial complex and many related changes in U.S. history. The first and most obvious signs were political, as the resistance to imperialism crested in 1968. Abolition now.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program, or welcome to the third hour of our program. Over at Fox, the staffers, Fox so-called news, staffers are privately corresponding with each other, and some of this has been leaked to the media, about their just absolute disgust with Greg Gutfeld saying that, well, here was his exact remark. He said, "Did you ever read Man's Search for Meaning? Viktor Frankl talks about how you had to survive in a concentration camp by having skills. You had to be useful. Utility kept you alive." End quote. First off, obviously Greg Gutfeld never read Man's Search for Meaning, and he's just throwing Viktor Frankl's name out there because he thinks it makes him sound sophisticated, because that's not what Frankl wrote, or even wrote about. It's kind of adjacent to it. But secondly, I mean, this is just, as I said yesterday, I pointed out, when the people were taken off the railroad cars and sorted to desert camp and who goes to the death camp or to the ovens, they were not being asked, what skills do you have? Nobody asked that question. This is just crazy. One Fox producer said, quote, "I'm amazed that Fox has any ability to retain employees from multicultural backgrounds. Our workplace is shockingly diverse given the vitriol that often makes it to the air. Understand that they're likely here for the same reason I am. These jobs are scarce, but I can't help feel awful for them because they undoubtedly see this nonsense and can't do anything to stop it." Another person said that there's a lot of internal worry about Gutfeld's comments. At any other place, this person said his career would be over. White House Deputy Press Secretary and Senior Communications Advisor Andrew Bates said, "What Fox News allowed to be said on the air yesterday and so far has failed to condemn is an obscenity. That is not complicated, that there was nothing good about slavery and there was nothing good about the Holocaust, full stop." Keep an eye on this. Meanwhile, Gen Z is rolling into town. These numbers are just absolutely amazing. First of all, Gen Z, the Zoomers, are, it turns out in the South, a lot of them are hardcore Republicans, and that's a concern. But generally speaking, across the United States, Zoomers are more with the Democratic Party, or more with progressive values anyway, and that's a good sign. Following the 2022 midterm election, Charles Gaba, who's a self-described numbers geek, this is from Carrie Eleveld over on dailycoast.com, concluded that Arizona's Democratic Attorney General candidate would probably beat the Republican because of COVID deaths. Now, this is amazing. There were 4,100 more deaths in Arizona of Donald Trump voters than there were of Joe Biden voters, because the Donald Trump voters were not taking COVID seriously, not wearing masks, stuff like that. So more, and the Democrat, Chris Mays, beat the Republican challenger by 280 votes.
and 4,000 more Republicans died from COVID than Democrats. So, you know, that's interesting. But even more interesting are the numbers of the Zoomers, which is where I started this. I'm quoting from Kerry Elleveld's piece. He writes, roughly 4 million young people electorate each year, amounting to about 32 million new eligible voters between 2016 and the upcoming 2024 contest. 32 million new young voters. At the same time, roughly 2.5 million elderly Americans die each year, reducing the number of older voters, that would be the Fox voters, by roughly 20 million since 2016. So what we have is a net 52 million new voters. And that's about 20% of the total eligible electorate of 258 million Americans who are eligible to vote. Now, one downside to this is that the Zoomers are more likely to take seriously third-party candidates. These are people who have not, been carefully watching multiple election cycles. They don't realize that the reason that Donald Trump became president in 2016, for example, was because in 5 swing states, Jill Stein was on the ballot, and in each one of those states, had she not been on the ballot, Hillary Clinton would have won. She took way more votes in each one of those states than Donald Trump won by, than the margin by which Donald Trump won. Similarly, Ralph Nader in 2000, giving the election in Florida to George W. Bush. But all that said, this could be a massive tipping point election in 2024. So keep an eye on it, and let's all do everything we can to get the word out. We're only 5 seats away from controlling the House of Representatives. That's all Hakeem Jeffries needs to become Speaker of the House, and the first black Speaker of the House in history, which would be pretty amazing too. There's this redistricting brawl going on right now down in Alabama that was ordered by the Supreme Court. The Republicans there keep ignoring the court. They've done this now twice. And, this could, by the way, go beyond Alabama. This could also affect Texas, Florida, and South Carolina, the redistricting that's going on. Louisiana and Georgia are states to keep an eye on as well. Georgia is expected to draw another map. The decision that we got in the Alabama case in those other 5 states that I just mentioned, that you could see, another member of Congress or another 2 or 3 members of Congress on the Democratic side coming from each one of those states, which would be not only a good thing, but it would flip Congress. And that's without, voters showing up. I mean, there's 18 Republican members of Congress from districts that were won by Joe Biden. And, Democrats are going to be fighting hard for those 18 seats also. So stay tuned, as they say in this business. Finally, a just horrific story out of Florida. This, again, this is from Daily Kos, David K.C. writing. The headline is, "One reason we're leaving Florida. Medical professionals can now deny me care because I'm gay." And yeah, it wasn't, the Stop Woke Act was bad. The Don't Say Gay law was terrible. But now there's a third piece of legislation that was passed by the Republican legislature and was signed by Ron DeSantis back in May. And I reported on it at the time, and then, everybody just kind of forgot about it, including me. And that was this under the guise of religious freedom, which is the new buzzword that the Supreme Court has saluted, has authorized for legal discrimination. Under the guise of religious freedom, in Florida, anybody in the medical profession, and this includes people who are not even medical professionals. This includes insurance companies. It includes pharmacies. It includes drugstores. It includes, basically anybody adjacent to medicine can now refuse to serve you if you are gay, lesbian, or trans in Florida. And all they have to do is say, I have a deeply held religious belief. This is breathtaking. And the insurance companies can refuse to insure you in Florida because you're gay.
Now, odds are they won't do that, but, you know, I can see pharmacists. I mean, being a gay person in Florida has got to be a real challenge right now. Can you imagine? I mean, particularly if you need medication that, or, you know, if, for example, you know, if you're a trans person and, say, a trans man who has to take testosterone regularly, and you show up at the pharmacy and the pharmacist says, no, I'm sorry, I won't give it to you. I have a deeply held religious conviction that you're not, you know, legitimately a trans person. What do you do? Or somebody needs AIDS medication, HIV medication, or just PrEP, you know, just the systems now that they have that prevent you from contracting HIV, that are, you know, mostly being used by gay men. And the pharmacist says no, or the doctor says, I won't prescribe this. Or, you know, you've got a great doctor and a great pharmacist and they both retire or age out or get a new job someplace else. This is what this fellow, David KC, is writing about over on Daily Cozy. He's like, my husband and I are moving out of Florida because we're concerned. He talks about how they're approaching retirement age. And this ability to discriminate against gay people also includes retirement homes, because they're medicine adjacent. This is, again, this is a specific law that was passed in Florida by the Republicans in the legislature over the objections of every single Democrat and signed into law by Ron DeSantis. According to the ACLU's analysis, the law's opt-out provision will apply not just to doctors, but also to nurses, pharmacies, hospitals, mental health providers, medical transcription services, clinical lab personnel, and nursing homes. Now, the law does say that you can't deny health care based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. But when Democrats said, let's insert gender identity and sexuality in here, Republicans said no. They refused. And that's the tell, that when they wrote this bill, it was intended to specifically allow all these people in these various medical professions and adjacent to them to discriminate against the entire LGBTQ plus community. They might as well just put up a sign that says no queer people, you know, allowed here, or, you know, dogs and queer people. This is obscene. Of course, it shouldn't surprise us. I mean, it came out of the GOP, and the GOP, being as they are, in the bag for the fossil fuel industry that is killing our planet. They don't want us talking about that. So instead, they're waging a jihad, a holy war against you know, gays, lesbians, and trans people. I'm just shocked all over again and horrified. And the other part about this, by the way, you know, Florida got away with this. There's 20 some odd other states that are controlled entirely by Republicans. This is not going to be limited to Florida. I can guarantee you that.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Meanwhile, in Michigan, Governor Ittner yesterday just tweeted out, you know, that they just passed a law protecting gay people. She said, as the proud parent of a member of the community. And welcome back, Ed in Chicago. Hey, Ed, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
No, hey, Tom. Well, yeah, it's Tom. But first, you were talking about Eisenhower earlier, and if you get a chance on TBS, there's a show called The 100 Days. They talk about the Suez Canal crisis in the 50s. And not only did Eisenhower keep us out of that crisis, but he was so PO'd against England that when England needed help from the International Monetary Fund to shore up the pound, he wouldn't allow that to be done until England withdrew their troops from the Suez Canal.
Yeah, I wrote about that back in the early 2000s. That's when I learned about it. I was researching something else, and I don't remember.
It was a piece I wrote for Common Dreams in like 2004, 2005, and learned about that. And it was a pretty amazing story, Ed.
Oh yeah, I mean he went against Israel, France, and England. You know, staunch allies, and he told them to screw up. But listen, the reason I was calling is there's an answer. I had a caller earlier about UFOs, and you were asking him how can UFOs navigate the hazards of space and end up crashing on Earth like a bunch of teenagers. And there's an answer to that.
Okay, I'm listening.
Yeah, Douglas Adams in his book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Great scientific tome.
Yep, there's teenagers from other planets. They refer to themselves as teasers. And what they will do is they'll fly around to planets that have not made interstellar contact yet, and they'll land in front of somebody in some remote area, somebody whom nobody's going to believe, and they walk up in front of them down and making beep beep noises, and then they take off and leave.
That's what Sean said. You know, when I wrapped that segment, we were going into the break, and I said, and you know, why are they crashing into America like drunken teenagers? And after we hit the break, and I was no longer on the air, and Sean said, well, maybe they're interstellar teenagers. Maybe they are drunken teenagers.
That's it. They're just according to Douglas Adams, they're just doing it for kicks. So there's your answer.
May well be. Okay, Ed, that was a good one. Thank you very much for that. Alfredo in Mountain View, California. Hey, Alfredo, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I am an environmental scientist, and the United Nations panel of scientists or climatologists have stated that more than 51% of all the man-made greenhouse gases are caused by animal agriculture. That means that all the cars, trucks, planes, trains, etc., combined worldwide. And so by switching to a plant-based diet, we not only do we eat healthier, but we are also contributing to reduce climate change.
You're absolutely right.
So
I didn't know that it was 51%. I thought it was in the 30s. Can you give me a source on that, Alfredo, that I could look up? I'd love to write about this.
Yeah, if you look on the United Nations climate change report, they revised this report, I believe, about 5 years ago or so, and all that information is there. Yeah.
You know, and people don't even have to go full vegan. I mean, if you just go cut down to eating flesh foods once a week, or I mean, start out by just meatless Mondays is a great start. But you're absolutely right, Alfredo. Not only do you get healthier, you live longer, you have a higher quality of life because your body works better, your brain works better. If you cut back on the flesh foods and dairy products, but you're also you're helping save the planet. You are absolutely right. Alfredo, I got to run, but thanks for the call. That was a good one. We'll be right back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. And welcome back. 23 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls today. William in Sarasota, Florida. Hey, William, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I just heard a professor from Columbia University named Jeffrey Sachs. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
I have.
Yeah.
I've followed him for years, in fact.
Yeah. Well, he elaborated on his take on the 250 years of past Anglo-Saxon aspirations for a unipolar world. And this kind of interested me specifically when he elaborated on the wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and other wars, secret wars in Syria and Libya. And 30 years of NATO expansion as being part of that aspiration.
Oh, don't tell me Jeffrey Sachs has become a tanky.
Well, no, I'm just saying that's what he said. I just wanted to get your take if you've heard that.
No, I haven't. I haven't, and I've always respected him. And there's a number of people I have respected in the past, who have just bought hook, line, and sinker this BS that Putin is peddling on social media here in the United States. We had RFK Jr. yesterday come out and say that, that America pushed Russia into invading Ukraine. I mean, come on, give me a break. Not buying it. William, thanks for the call. Daniel in Bakersfield, California. Hey, Daniel, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good afternoon there, Tom. Good morning, actually. I'm in Bakersfield. Hey, I was just going to, you were talking about just the global warming and how our planet is just heating up every year.
Uh-huh.
And I have a route here in Bakersfield. I deliver breads to the stores, the little convenience stores. And I've been running an electric van, cargo van, a 1-ton cargo van for, a year already. And my wife, she drives an electric car. We got solar on top of our on our rooftops. It's possible to do this, man, but people need to realize it's much cheaper to go this way because the sun is free.
Yeah. Well, and even if you're buying your electricity off the grid, like I do at home, I just plug my car into the garage. My electric, when I'm buying electricity, when I'm using my home electricity, it's costing me less than $1 a gallon equivalent of gasoline to drive my electric car. And when I buy it from the high-priced vendors, the charging stations where you put in a credit card, it's about the equivalent of $2 a gallon gasoline. So it's still cheap.
Yeah, and we had I'm from California. I'm on Kevin McCarthy's district. We had a recall on our governor here, and you know who put up all the millions of dollars for that?
Probably the fossil fuel industry.
The oil. You're exactly right. The oil companies did. Yeah. They don't like being regulated, and they don't like them being scrutinized.
Yeah, and they don't like the mandate that every house have solar energy on it too.
I'm okay with Iran going online and Venezuela going online, and let's get rid of OPEC and let's let these oil companies compete for the business.
Yeah. Well, I think frankly, we should nationalize the oil companies here in the United States. It would cost less than Trump's tax cuts, and we could stop them from funding climate change denial and stop them from funding the GOP. I think it's an imperative.
It's possible we can run electric vehicles. I mean, I'm running a business 10 hours a day out of it.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Running my van.
Yep. Daniel, thank you. Thanks for your testimony. I appreciate it. We'll be back. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Picking up your calls on the other side of the break. Stay with us.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. We'll be right back.
This
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. This is from the introduction. Criminology on Trump is about family business, habitual lawlessness, and the struggle for economic and political power. The central character, Donald Trump, is a con artist, a master gaslighter, and a shrewd racketeer. It is the story of how the Houdini of white-collar crime and the founder and CEO of the Trump Organization operated a criminal enterprise from within an incorporated organization beginning in 1980 and continuing up to and from within the bowels of the White House for 4 years. At the same time, it's the history of the causation of the social, psychological, and physical harms connected to the Donald and his associates before, during, and after the presidency. This book is also an account of the activities that Donald Trump pursued in order to obtain the power of Commander-in-Chief of the United States, what he then did with that power of the bully pulpit once he achieved it, and finally the lengths to which he would go to keep from losing that power. Lastly, this is the story of what many elected and appointed politicos did or did not do to acquire or to forfeit their individual shares of Trumpian power. This overall analysis of the underside of the rule of law begs the question, had the Donald not become the 45th president of the United States, would he,
his children, or the Trump Organization have found themselves formal defendants, adversaries of the people of the state of New York? My answer unequivocally would have been no way. As of January 6, 2022, the question remains open as to whether Donald Trump, as the former president, or any of his family members will ever be indicted and prosecuted for criminal tax fraud and the other felonies, along with the Trump Organization, Inc., and its CFO, Alan Weisselberg. From the point of view of newsmaking, lawlessness, and equal justice, much of the popular discourse surrounding Trump has to do with competing narratives. The most reverberating of these has been the dueling apocalyptic narratives traversing both old and new media platforms alike. One narrative has to do with witch hunts, hoaxes, fake news, global elites, and the deep state engaging in a myriad of underworld and otherworld conspiracies to bring down Trump. The other narrative has to do with saving the U.S. democracy from authoritarianism, recovering law and order from the damage, chaos, and trauma of Trump, and restoring American normalcy without all of that political insanity. While these two narratives capture the cultural conflict, the diverse groups of people at work here and the rival social movements of incompatible interests, desires, and visions, neither speaks to the fundamental structural conditions that generate the divisiveness between these two narratives. Without ever addressing these structural relationships, the two sides will remain at loggerheads for some time to come. The medium is always, as always, is still the message. And so far in the 21st century, social media is the medium. At the same time, the weaponizing of racism, misogyny, hate, fear, intimidation, and violence vis-a-vis social media is neither new nor unique to the United States. These socio-cultural expressions of the contradictions of patriarchy, neocolonialism, and capitalism have been around since the nation's inception. Today's Proud Boys are the contemporary versions of New England churchmen in the 1700s, the Klan riders of the 1800s, or the fervent McCarthy in the 1950s. Likewise, the anti-critical race theory politicians of today that do the bidding for white minority rule and racial discrimination are very much the same as John C. Calhoun fronting for the rich plantation owners during the antebellum South. The primary differences between the not-so-distant past of the last 75 years and the present have to do with the disbursements of the accumulation of capital. From post-World War II until around 1974, the United States experienced close to 3 decades of unparalleled upward social mobility, as well as a rapidly expanding middle class. Since the mid-1970s to 2022, there's been a steady increase in economic inequality, a shrinking middle class, and downward social mobility for many. Thus, the contemporary bipartisan erosion of the liberal capitalist consensus in the United States is not the primary cause of our present democratic crisis, but it is rather symptomatic of a much broader problem that neither the Republicans, as a whole, nor most of the Democrats are willing to accept. The book, continuing. I'm referring to the inability of our bourgeois democratic system to resolve the contradictions of a political economy that promises the American dream to one and all and yet caters to the richest 1% and provides suitably for the upper 10%. In other words, our country's present-day conflicts over identity politics, government failures, neoliberal policies, right-wing intransigencies, and climate change not only predate Donald Trump and Trumpism, but they are all fundamentally driven by the unrelenting and expanding political economy of structural inequality. What makes this Trump book different from the others is that it is the only one grounded in the scientific study of crime and social control. Criminology focuses on the pathology of harmful acts and the cultural construction of both crime and punishment. The book is Criminology on Trump, from international trade policy to immigration policy to housing. We've got all kinds of topics. The wars between Republicans and Democrats, the Republican efforts to induce fascism in the United States. A great selection of opinions will be found over at HartmannReport.com. You know, back in the day, the Republicans had these kind of soft, big lies. Ronald Reagan telling us that if we just cut taxes on billionaires, it'll trickle down to all the rest of us. And Climate change isn't caused by fossil fuels, of course. Voter fraud is caused by black people, and gays and lesbians and trans people want to convert your children. All these lies. Public school teachers are communists. They really are not working. So now the Republicans have a new strategy because their lies are not working, including their lies about COVID and about Russia and about the media and everything in public schools, abortion. Because their lies aren't working, they're actually going after university-level researchers who look into how lies are created and propagated across social media and in the media and in politics. It's an amazing story reported by both the Washington Post and the New York Times. I got a whole rant about it over at hartmannreport.com. Check it out. 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Joseph in Crestline, California. Hey, Joseph, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. I spend thousands of hours listening and watching Senate hearings, House hearings, and I've come to a conclusion that the Republican Party needs a disclosure statement saying the Republican Party for entertainment purposes only.
Yeah, or something close to that. Yep. It's really sad. I mean, it's all pomp and ceremony. It's all huffing and puffing. It's all outrage all the time because they don't have any policies that Americans want. I mean, the Republicans want to privatize Social Security and do away with it. Americans don't want that. The Republicans did privatize Medicare. Half of Medicare now is Medicare Advantage. It's terrible. And Americans, I don't think want that. I think they're being fooled into buying it. Republicans want to cut taxes on billionaires who right now are only paying 3.4% income taxes in the United States on average. And Americans don't want that. Republicans want to gut the ability of the federal government to do anything about global warming. Americans don't want that. So, and the list goes on and on and on, right? And because of this, they've got to, if they're going to win elections, they've got to figure out a way to distract voters and Americans from all the horrible things that they support in exchange for all the money that they get from the fossil fuel industry, from the insurance industry, from big pharma, and from all these other toxic industries, the ISP industries, the big tech, and so they huff and puff about gay people or whatever. I mean, it's just it's terrible. Joseph, excellent disclaimer. I'm with you. Thank you for the call. Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind today?
Well, when you were speaking about foreign buyers buying a property in this country, I remember back in about 1968 when I moved to Milwaukee, talking to a gentleman in the finance company, and he said at that time, nobody in this country was allowed to sell any property at all to anybody that was not an American, and monopolies were not allowed. They were also against the law.
Right.
And I was wondering, when were those things changed? And then came along this big buy-up of all the homes and housing in the United States, and with the help of the banks and financiers doing a great wrong to young working people. They sold them houses and said they were giving them a chance to buy a property, and if they couldn't quite afford it all, they would give them a good rate. And after 2 years, if they could come up with the right credit report, they would let them have a good rate. Well, come along 2 years, and the banks and the finance companies said, sorry about that. They raised their rates, and you no longer qualify. And so tons of young people who put their hearts and their minds and their souls and their work into buying a home, it was taken away from them. And I think I talked about that once before, and that's never been okay. And you can tell now where you read in the paper about the banks buying up all these bankrupt properties or old properties.
So here's where it began.
People do.
Joan, this is where it began. First of all, I didn't know, and I don't know, that it was ever illegal in the United States. It may have been in some individual states for non-Americans to buy residential property. But I think it should be.
Well, foreigners,
but I can tell you,
didn't live here.
Right. But I can tell you that the end of
our monopoly laws was in the summer of 1983 when Ronald Reagan ordered the Department of Justice, the Security and Exchange Commission, and the Federal Trade Commission to stop enforcing the Sherman Act, the Clayton Antitrust Act, and the Antitrust Act of 1956. I wrote a book about it. It's called The Hidden History of American Monopoly. And that's when, you know, the serious monopolization of American business began and the destruction of small, you know, family-owned businesses. And in terms of giant corporations and hedge funds buying up massive quantities of residential property, that trend largely began after 2000, let's see, what was it? 2008. At the last year of the Bush administration, we had a major crash that was the result of the Bush's deregulation. Well, actually, it was the deregulation of the banking industry was in 1999. It was the, you know, when they
when it started.
When they overturned they overturned Glass-Steagall in Congress, and Bill Clinton signed that law, which was just insane. And so the bankers went on a binge of just stealing from everybody and crashed the housing market. And housing, you know, single-family residential housing stock in 2008, 2009 dropped in value by as much as 20% in some cities. And that was when the big banks and the investment houses stepped in and started buying these houses and flipping them into rental properties. And since then, it's become just a major industry. In fact, you can buy, you know, on the stock market, you can buy exchange-traded funds in these companies that invest in single-family housing, and they're insanely profitable. You know, it's actually a good investment. I mean, it's a terrible thing, but so anyhow, that's what I know about that. Joan, thank you for the call. Your points are very well made. Norma in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Norma. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's on your mind today?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, good. I was just calling. I wanted to talk the caller that called in earlier from Albuquerque, Brian, and I'm going to speak to him directly. I hope you're still listening. I live in Rio Rancho, and you can correct me also, Tom, as I move along. But as passionate as you are about affordable housing and the immigration issue and everything, and not having enough housing just, you know, for ourselves, much less anybody else coming to the community, I would first find out who your city council member is and go to a city council meeting and address those issues from a local level. Then I would reach out to your House representative, your New Mexico House representative. And then I would reach out, you know, so that this could go out to maybe into a federal program, because your ideas were great, but you've got to act on them. And, you know, we go through a lot of stuff listening to Tom's show. You know, there are some fantastic callers with lots of information. But and I took your advice on, we have to do something. You know, and that's what I would do. And then I would reach out to your U.S. representative, Melanie Stansberry. Yeah. But I believe for something like that, and this is going to cut across all states, this is, you know, the federal government can allocate that, but it still has to depend on the states to give it.
Right. Yeah. And
Portland, Maine is facing this same issue, and I went through a conversation with my sister-in-law. Because what's happening right now is there's a hostility that's building between the migrants and the lack of housing. Right. You know, Maine's a poor state to begin with. Right. And my, you know, suggestion to her is, you know, go to the city council, you know, come up with an idea.
Get it.
You know,
hey, you know, yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Norma, and your points are really well taken. It's like my friend and colleague Joe Madison is kind of famous for asking people, okay, what you going to do about it? And I, you know, which is essentially what you're saying, and that's brilliant. The other data point that I would toss into this conversation is that there are more empty single-family homes in America as the result of people buying them for investments. There are more empty single-family homes in America than there are homeless people in America. And that should give us all pause.
No, it should. Yeah, it should.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You can't talk like that on the air, Norma. And thank you for the call. Lori in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Lori, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm revisiting climate change.
Yeah.
When President Biden decides that he's going to declare it a national disaster. We could come up with something called a national PAC, which I've called PAC, Patriots Against Climate Change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think first and foremost, we need to kind of state the obvious. No state can get through a disaster without declaring that their state needs government help.
Right.
And then we have to make sure that we get back to the color coding like we did in Georgia during 9/11. And we have to color code each state's disaster. And every state, every night, will show what actual disasters they're going through and what they have done to mitigate them. Every state needs to, what do they say? Pull your state up by the bootstraps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, every state's efforts will be reflected on the daily color-coded chart.
Yeah.
And people can use that as bragging rights.
I love it. I love it. There's so many things that we can do, and that's a very creative solution. Lori, thank you for the call. There's no shortage of great ideas. The problem that we have is that every single elected Republican in America is taking money from or getting support from the networks that are funded by fossil fuel billionaires. That's our biggest problem.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
The Supreme Court has made it legal for those fossil fuel billionaires to bribe the entire Republican Party, basically. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Patrick, watching Free Speech TV in Lakewood, California. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Actually, I'm listening to Sirius XM online. So.
Oh, okay. I'll note that so in the future I don't pick you up when they're in a commercial. But here we are right now, Patrick. So what's on your mind?
That is all fine. Just to enlarge on the tag going into your last break. Republicans doing everything they can because they're in the pockets of millionaires. Apparently, from what I read last night, Mike Pence has put out a bullet point paper saying that if elected, he wants to pull the EPA and the Consumer Protection Agency.
Right. And it's not just Mike Pence. This is a Heritage Foundation thing. They've come up with an action plan for the next Republican president.
Well, apparently Pence has enlarged on, at least put his voice to that. I'm sure that basically any Republican, even those that won't say it up front, will probably attempt to do that.
Yeah. I can read you the list, actually. This is the Heritage Foundation plan would gut the EPA, reduce its staff, end the Department of Energy's Office of Energy Efficiency, end the Office of Renewable Energy, end the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, end grid expansion for the benefit of renewable resources, and ban EPA workers from using climate science to make decisions, and prevent any other state from copying California's strict environmental standards for greenhouse gases.
Vote blue.
Yeah.
Vote.
Yeah, this pretty much tells you everything you need to know about the Heritage Foundation, first off, and how effective the ability of these right-wing billionaires to buy politicians has been. It's truly a sad thing. But with regard to Mike Pence, do you know that this is a specific plan of his, or was he just citing Heritage? Because I just said that he was probably citing Heritage, but I'm not. I can't say that for certain. Did you see a plan by Pence on his website, for example?
No, it was on Flipboard that it was accredited to Pence. I did not see Heritage.
What is Flipboard?
Flipboard is a news service that basically you can go onto and make comments of various current event news stories. In fact, you've appeared on Flipboard, and so I'd suggest taking a look.
Should I be posting to it? Is it like a social media site?
It's really not a social media site. You can flip stories to it, but the main draw to it is that people can put in comments.
Interesting. I'll check it out. Patrick, thank you. Thank you very much for the call and for the information. I truly appreciate it. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Stay with us. I'll be back with you in 60 seconds. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting progressive talk radio, and tag you're it. When I was a little kid, my grandmother had a piano, and I loved to play it. I was incompetent, but I was figuring out all kinds of stuff. And then I kind of got away from it and, went to school and things got busy and just lost track of it. Well, now there's this fascinating new study out of the University of Geneva, Switzerland, that is making me think maybe I should go back and learn the piano. What they found was that they took a group of 132 healthy older adults, retired, 62 to 78 years old. Half of them learned the piano, half of them took music classes without learning the piano. And what they found was that those who learned the piano actually had the strongest increase in their memory, in their mental competence, their mental faculties. Those who took the music classes also did well, but learning the piano was a huge step. So check it out. There's a whole long rant about this over at HartmannReport.com. Check it out. Two minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Picking up your calls here. Bob in Ontario, Canada, or California, excuse me. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind?
Yes, I want to talk about enacting some kind of a statute or a law that every broadcaster who uses public airways or a public service needs to swear an oath to tell the truth. Okay, or they have to place a prominent banner on their screen saying that this is possibly not the truth, or some kind of thing where they don't it's disputed, or it's opinion or something. We've got to stop these people from pretending that they're telling us the truth when they're lying to us.
I share your sentiment and your outrage, Bob. I absolutely do. The problem is who's going to be the arbiter of what is truth and what isn't, and who's going to enforce that law, and what happens when you have a Republican administration and they're the ones who are deciding what's true and what's not.
No, we go to a court.
No, this is why the First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech and assembly, and the freedom to petition your government for redress of grievances. Because when you put that kind of a power to decide what's true and what's not true, and to punish people for saying things that you say are not true, when you put that kind of power in the hands of government, any government, no matter how benevolent, no matter how wonderful, no matter how democratic, you have crossed a very, very dangerous line. Like I said, I share your sentiments, and I wish that there was some easy and magic way to do it. I worked in this industry, in the broadcast industry, back in the 60s when we had the Fairness Doctrine. And, we had to have, anytime the radio stations that I worked at, and I also worked at a television station, WJIM TV, Channel 6 in Lansing, whenever the ownership or management of the station expressed an opinion on the air, it had to be balanced by an opinion
from an opposing perspective. But that was limited pretty much to little 4- and 5-minute editorials that they would run that were like like the editorials in a newspaper. But beyond that, it didn't have that much bite. It did require broadcasters to program in the public interest, and that was interpreted as having real news at the top of the hour. But even now, today, there's this dispute about what's real news. I mean, you've got Fox News offering, news at the top of the hour to radio stations all over the country. So it's a mess. Bob, thank you for the call, though. Mark in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. So I'm wondering, in terms of like Florida and other red states that are implementing all these discriminatory laws against the LGBTQ, if they could file as a class action a federal lawsuit for an impingement of civil liberties in terms of discrimination, and or what would be, there has to be some kind of remedy federally that they can take against these states that are they're basically taking away their rights. So I
don't think that the federal protections against discrimination based on gender identity or sexuality, for lack of a better word, are strong enough to support that. I mean, this is a problem that we have at the federal level. The discrimination, and frankly, we also need the Equal Rights Amendment. This is also a problem for women. But I think we would need to strengthen our federal laws significantly first before otherwise, people would be suing the state of Florida right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's unequal protection is part of the basis of federal law for,
I agree. The 14th Amendment. Yeah.
But what are your thoughts? Why won't Biden start saying we're going to expand the court? I mean, what's holding him back?
I think what's holding him back right now is that he knows that it would not work. It would never get out of the House of Representatives, and if it made it to the Senate, it would be shot down with a filibuster, and Manchin and Sinema would mess with him, and it would just look like a failure. I think he's waiting to see what happens after the 2024 election, and I believe that if we can succeed in taking back the court, that we'll be in good shape. So anyhow, it's the end of the show here. So Mark, thank you for the call.
Thank you.
And apologies to everybody on hold. And we'll get to you tomorrow. Tomorrow's Anything Goes Friday. It should be a great day. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.